Good evening and welcome. Our first speaker tonight is Oren Lyons, who is an outspoken advocate for our natural world. As faith keeper of the Turtle Clan of the Onondaga Nation, Oren is responsible for passing on and interpreting his people's ceremonial ways and upholding the Haudenosaunee culture. Their confederation is the oldest living participatory democracy in the world. He oversees the spiritual well-being of the Onondaga community. Their well-being is intimately connected to the natural world, a value system that is radically different from Western European colonizers. Because of their profound spiritual relationship with and respect for Mother Earth, they are acutely aware of and deeply concerned by the accelerated degradation of our natural world, their relatives. For decades, they have been urging world leaders to take heed of the perilous journey we are all on. They lend a voice for their natural relatives that have no voice. Oren was chosen many years ago to be a runner to carry and deliver important messages determined by elders, clan mothers, and council of chiefs. He is an internationally renowned leader and visionary for peace, justice, and sovereignty, a tireless advocate for Indigenous people around the world. It is an honor for me tonight to introduce you to Oren Lyons, and welcome to Veterans for Peace.
Yeah, wow. That's our greeting of saying thank you. Yeah, wow. Well, I'm glad that that you've gathered again, and that the concept and the idea of peace is the foundation of our confederacy, and our confederacy is very, very old. There recently is a study that's being done by Ithaca College and Cornell University. They're trying to determine the age of our confederation according to our stories, and that it evolves around a discussion with the peacemaker talking to the Seneca Nation. And at that time, he was trying to convince them to join the Confederacy and become the Union that we are. And they were not very much agreeable. And he said, well, tomorrow, I'm telling you, tomorrow I'm going to cover the sun. And then we'll have a discussion. And the next day, there was an eclipse. The sun was covered. And that convinced the Senecas that this was not an ordinary person. And they joined the Confederation. And so they're going, so the people who are investigating the beginning of our Confederation are working around that particular time. And they figure it's close to 1,600 years that the Confederation has been in working. The anthropologists and the archaeologists and the historians, Americans, the Europeans here, said to us that you guys really didn't come into existence till we got here. And since the history is written by the people who are coming and writing, and we didn't have much to say about it because we weren't speaking in the language. So it's been what they call his story, history, their story, the way they, and it's badly flawed and a lot of lies, and it's not doing its proper duty to the people of this country to understand the real history and the importance of the native people of this land. You've only, I would say, little over 500 years, or as some of our elders would say, 5 days ago, in the time, you've only been here 5 days, and look at the damage that's been done. Look what you've done. And they said, it's that the nature, which is what you're dealing with, has its own laws and rules. And if you don't abide those laws and rules, you will just simply suffer the consequence. And so the Western mind, from my observation, and these are my thoughts. Sometimes we have a broad agreement across the Six Nations, but in my discussion today, it's coming from me personally. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Confederacy. I'm speaking on behalf of myself in this conversation. And so I want you to understand that, because there are times when I do speak on behalf of the Confederacy and even beyond that. So this is a conversation between us. And I'm just giving you some of our background, some of our thoughts, and so forth. So to begin with, you've only been here 5 days. And the damage. You know, in the history of humanity, 500 years is a second. It's just a blip. But look at what's happened these 500 years here. And from my observation, the major problem that we have today is the human population. There's not that very long ago, when I was born in 1930, so in 1950, when I was going into the U.S. Army, there were roughly 2.5 billion people in the whole world. That's some 70 years ago. 2.5. So within 70 years, we've tripled the population of the world. There's over 8 billion people in the world today. Now you want to reflect on that. That's 8 billion people that have to have water, food, and a place to live.
It's changed so dramatically, I think.
So when you reflect on that, you'll see the inequity. And if, from my observation, I would say that if everybody was treated equally and had equal, we would be able to manage that. Just about manage it. But as you know, the inequity that's in the world today is really the problems. The inequity. There are some people in this world who are eating dirt. And there are some people in this world who are angry because they have to wait for a yacht. The inequity. And so that inequity is what you have to deal with, because it's a reality. And here in the United States, there's a lot of poor people. And there's a whole section of Native people who have been sidelined, put on reservations. And it wasn't that long ago when they had armed forces around those reservations. So they weren't reservations. They were enclaves. They were prisons, basically. If you got an army around you that won't let you walk out there, that's a prison. Here in the US, so-called free country. And so the reality of that history, until that history is told of the Native people here, there are millions and millions who died from contagion. You know, the diseases that was brought over by the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, wiped out millions and millions of our people. And so the historians, I remember when I was just beginning at that time, they said, well, that was only about 1 million native people in this country to begin with. Well, now that truth is starting to come out, and there was many, many millions of people here. We're old, we're very old, we've been here a long time. And just recently, you know, the historians have said, well, you've been here about 12,000 years. And just recently they found a fire somewhere, you know, they were able to carbon date that fire that somewhere our people were living around. It's 20 years old.
If you need to, you don't need to know why.
So that's 20,000 years though, 20 years.
Wow.
And that's so now they have to admit that their initial number of 12,000 is now 20,000. And I'll tell you what, you're going to go back and keep finding older and older people. And so the question arises is why was it so important to keep us at 1 million? I mean, that's what, you don't have to go too far back in a history book, and that's what they'd be telling the children every day. It was only about 1 million people. Well, that was one huge lie. And that was because what happened to the 20 million people that were here at the landfall of Columbus? And there was, in 1900, which was just a few years ago, I counted the native people in the USA, and there was 265,000. 265,000 left from 20 million. You want to talk about a Holocaust?
Any body parts that
So,
are part of Native American life, back where they belong.
our Confederacy, and getting back to the reality of first of all, you know, I was just a common kid up on the reservation, and good friends, and grew up on a very tight community, real strong community. And I saw my first white person when I was about 4 years old, 4 or 5. There was a rag man that would come through our village. He was a white guy, and he was selling rags, and he had a horse and wagon, and he was to us very scary. He had a white beard and wearing black clothes, and us kids, or maybe about 5 or 6 of us, are hiding in the weeds by the road as we saw him go by on his wagon, and ooh, he was scary. And of course, that was my first introduction to white people. And that's how secluded the Onondaga Nation was. And now, you know, from that person with that horse and buggy, when we were that small, talking 1935 now, a lot of horse and buggy in 1935. And from that time to this time, flying to the moon, I mean, setting up we used to look at the moon, now they're up there, and sending vehicles even further into the universe. It's just an astonishing acceleration of civilization. I don't know what to call it, because it's the acceleration of science and development. But the the values that are running the world today, the bottom line of the values, and I'll use the term bottom line advisedly, because it's money. That's the system that's ruling the world today, is money. The system here in Turtle Island, before the landfall, that's 500 years ago or so, the system here was not money at all. It was relationship. It was a relationship was highly prized, to know one person better and be very close to people and relations, and everything was barter and we were based on sharing. And so the development of the system around the world today now is the opposite of sharing. But it's brought us to this point where we are today, looking at the possible extinction of the human beings. Now, how come we're at that position, And Veterans Against the War are a good idea for us, because when our Confederacy came together, we were based on peace. Our system, number one principle was peace. The number two principle was the equity, to be fair to everybody. And the number three principle was our union, to be united. And so we were working with these systems that didn't have the political connotations that are here today, but that's how we were living then. So we were in a different value system. We valued relationship above, well, we didn't even have money. We did all barter, exchange, and so forth. And shared everything. That was very common. Everybody shared. And we had councils, and the councils would meet to keep the peace if there was problems. And human beings always have problems, as you know. But our system was one of relationship. So there was an observation that I reflected on now just recently. I remembered that we had a very strong woman leader at Onondaga. Her name was Audrey Shenandoah. And she really was a foundational thinker of our system, maintaining it. And she could speak the languages of 5, 6 languages of the Confederation, and an offhand remark that I remember. We were having some kind of discussion, and she said, in our language, we don't have a word for wild. Now you reflect on that. We do not have a word for wild. So using that terminology, I would say the Wild West didn't get wild until the soldiers got there and until the cavalry got there. Then it got wild. And the cowboys with their guns. Then it got wild. But before that, it was peaceful. So the history of this country has really been denied its own people. And that's not good. Because if you don't know the reality of your history, you're going to make the same mistakes again and again and again. And this whole idea of peace, a peacemaker came. That's his name, the great peacemaker. He has a name, and we don't use it. And we just refer to him as the great peacemaker at his request. And so the system that we talked about, if there is no word for wild, then what is it that was here? And that was the recognition of our relationship and responsibilities. The human being has a great responsibility because of our intellect. We have an intellect. And the buffaloes, they have the buffalo intellect. That's all. I mean, they're buffaloes, or they're deers, or they're rabbits, or there are trees, or whatever it is, but the human beings has an intellect. And so we have this ability, we have options to do good or bad every day. Every day we wake up, every individual in this world has an option to be good today or be maybe the worst enemy they could be. Multiply that by 8.2 billion. That's what you're dealing with. And you can see what's going on around the world today. So the Veterans for Peace was reflective of our system, which is given to us by the great peacemaker. And he set up great symbols for us. And he said when at the Union, and he had gathered all these 5 warring nations at that time together at the what you call Onondaga Lake, but which has our name for it is, and this was told to me by Audrey again. She said that the name of this lake is where the leaves touch the water. But because our nation was around the lake, the white man called it Onondaga Lake. But there were names for everything around this world that has been overseen and overrun by the Western mind. You renamed everything. This guy, Henry Hudson, takes some Dutch people up to meet with the Mohawk Nation in a village which is now Albany, New York. And they named the whole river after that guy. For one trip up the river, it's now the Hudson River. But our name for that is the river that runs in 2 directions. The river that runs both ways. Because that's what happened. The tide will run all the way up to Albany. It's unique. It's not Hudson. So this guy that was really a boat captain for the Dutch who were up there meeting with their people, they named the river after him. And so that's what happened in this country. They named mountains after each individual. I mean, that kind of arrogance has a consequence. And now we're facing that consequence. Because killed our people, killed the people that were here. They're taken over from one end. I was listening to very, good man, and he was singing about the great song about from sea to shining sea.
So, wait a minute.
Invaders, been here 5 days, and now you're singing about your great sea to shining sea. Took over the whole country, took over the world. So I try to put a reflective position that we have to your discussion. But the great peacemaker said to us, he said that this is the mission now. The mission is peace.
Well, I made a mistake.
Oh,
Came back, I'm gonna sue.
very, very old. And in that process, he said, you're going to have to, he set up a system of governance. And he said that the men and the women make a family. And so you have to be working together all the time, of course. And he said, since the earth is female, he says, because that's where all the life comes from. The earth is female, he said. So our system, the Haudenosaunee system, is a matrilineal system. It follows the woman's side, not the men's side. the system that came over from England, the kings and queens from Spain and from Italy and from France and all of those places were all male dominated kings. Everything was men, male. Females were, as one great philosopher, Italian philosopher said, women didn't have souls. Can you imagine that? Women did not have souls. Wow, what kind of an arrogance. And that prevailed, that idea prevailed. And it is today, you know, even here in the United States now, one woman running for president mentioned, she says, you know, there's a glass ceiling for women. There's a glass ceiling. Can't go. Today, now. Reflect on that. The reality is that men and women are equal. Men and women have a responsibility to produce life. And our system, as the peacemaker said, was to promote a good life for generations to come. And that's where the term 7 generations come. Make your decisions on behalf of those people coming. If you do that, he said, you yourself will have peace. How about that? How about that? Today, wouldn't it be great? All the world leaders got together and said, it's time for peace. And so the mission is there. The mission is real. And on my reflection on the situation in the world today, there is only one option, and that's world peace. There's no other option. The other options is destruction. And so I don't want to go on to a rant, so I'll just remind you of why I appreciate your efforts and call yourself peacemakers.
Respect. And you know, and I would disagree with things that were said as a younger kid. And my uncle respected me. You know, I was, as long as I, you know, for him, if I was a hard worker and I was.
Thank you, Orrin. It is our honor to have you as our keynote speaker, as our major speaker, and open this evening's program of Veterans for Peace. Thank you for talking with us about the importance of peace, peace within ourselves, and peace with each other. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, good luck. Good luck to all of us.
Yes, and we will continue to work for peace in the world. You certainly are an inspiration to us.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now,
I'd like to continue the program tonight with words that we started last night from a friend of a colleague who is in Gaza. My friend Doug Hostetter sent another email today from messages that he received from God. And this is what he said. Here is terrible. The red zone is very close, and the bombing is very close. Some shrapnel reached us, and the sounds are terrifying, and the children are screaming. Son, so much worry, he cries. We don't know where to go. They are all-time bombing. My son became extremely frightened and became extremely terrified. He woke up screaming. The whole tent is covered in blood. The whole place is covered in blood. He remembered when we were bombed at school last fall. And God said to Doug, please know that I am praying for you and your family. Thank you so much, brother. I know you do that. But if Israel doesn't stop bombing, what will we do? We stop or we die. I promised Doug that I would share these words with all of us at Veterans for Peace at tonight's meeting, so that God will feel that we are with him and we will do more and we will continue our work, our struggle, our activism in the streets for peace. I'd now like to introduce Will Hopkins, who is the former executive director of New Hampshire Peace Action. Will is a lifelong New Hampshire resident who served for 6 years in the New Hampshire Army National Guard as an infantryman, which included a year-long tour in Iraq and a short period in Louisiana, responding to Hurricane Katrina. Will is a lifetime member and former board member of Veterans for Peace, and served as executive director of New Hampshire Peace Action from 2009 to 2023. He studied anthropology as an undergrad and obtained a master's in business administration. And most importantly, Will is a nonviolent direct action and peacekeeping trainer and lives in New Hampshire's Lakes region with his wife and 2 daughters. Will believes in the power of nonviolence to transform hearts, minds, and systems when the dignity of those who would be othered is held with respect and compassion. Will, thank you for being here tonight, and I turn the program over to you.
Thank you so much, Susan. And thanks also to Josh, Mike, and Shelley, and the whole team for allowing me to host tonight. This is a presentation that I pushed for during my brief stint as executive director of Vets for Peace, and I'm really glad that we decided to go forward with it, and I'm honored to be allowed to act as host tonight. My big concern when I was thinking about tonight's presentation was I wanted to make sure that we had the best possible advice in reference to our continuing work with allies to reach a ceasefire in Gaza. I wanted to make sure we were getting a solid overview of what a good strategy is when it comes to message, when it comes to legislative strategy, and when it comes to action. So I asked my friends at Combatants for Peace and American Friends of Combatants for Peace if they would give us someone, and they were kind enough to offer us Elik Elhanan. And then I called Hassan El Tayyab from the Friends Committee on National Legislation. And Hassan, when I reached out to him, said, "I'm not actually the one you want to speak, but I will introduce you to who is." And I'll give you more on that in a moment. Elik is one of the founders of Combatants for Peace. And Odelia is an IDF veteran as well, which left us with 2 Israeli identities. And I was introduced to Hueda through the planning committee. She's not just a token Palestinian. She carries an important story, wisdom, and perspective, especially for VFP as an organization who is perhaps best known for our work in direct action and our ability to engage the system directly in ways that are outside of lobbying and some of the regular pathways. First, we're gonna cover the message. In peace work, it's very unusual to bring people who are opponents to our work all the way over to becoming allies. But that's something that I've seen Combatants for Peace do. Here where I live in New Hampshire, I've seen some really staunch pro-Israel activists turn to peace work and start working with peace groups and Palestinians for a more peaceful future after being kind of exposed to this perspective that is brought by former combatants. So we're going to start with Elik. And I want to say Combatants for Peace is a very special organization. There's no time in history when former combatants of an active conflict have come together and worked in pairs to spread peace. It's never been done before, and it's a message that, if you've never heard it, is just extraordinarily powerful. Alec served in a special forces unit in the IDF from 1995 to 98. He served extensively in South Lebanon, the West Bank, and in Gaza. In 1997, his 14-year-old sister was killed by a suicide bomber in Jerusalem. He's also a military refuser. He joined Courage to Refuse in 2002, and then was a co-founder of Combatants for Peace. He served as the Israeli director of the group in 2006 and 2007. Besides that, his activism has included other initiatives and organizations. He's a longtime member of the Parents Circle Families Forum. He joined following his father, Rami Elhanan, in 2000. And in 2012, he participated in the attempt of the Swedish boat SV Estelle to break the Israeli blockade of Gaza. He has a PhD in Middle East Studies from Columbia and is currently teaching at City College in New York. So Alec, thank you so much for being with us tonight and bringing your voice and perspective and story to help us be more effective activists.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much. Thank you, Will, for this presentation, and thank you for the VFP for inviting me. It is always a pleasure and an honor to do stuff with you. Since the moment we've began, you've been staunch friends and allies. So in a sense, if you want to know what friends and allies of the movement should do, just look at yourself, and this is kind of it. But talking, I'll speak very briefly about Combatants for Peace and about the message, not very much in general, but in relation to the topic of this panel, direct action and legislative actions that can be taken, and I'll try and address these issues, but I'll say a few words in general about Combatants for Peace. First of all, now the connection between people from opposing side of the conflict, I mean, it is rare when it's happened, but we all know how powerful it is. I mean, definitely in VFP, where you celebrate the winter truce every year. So the power of people from opposing sides coming together is something that is known to us and familiar to us. Again, I mean, the model of the vets going back to Vietnam to heal and help reconstruct, etc., is something that is familiar to us and was a guiding model for us in constructing Combatants for Peace. As Will said, I started by refusing to serve the occupation, refusing to serve the Israeli army in the context of Courage to Refuse and other initiatives, believing that, I mean, our identity as soldiers, the gravitas that our position receives, will impact the Israeli system. But very shortly, I mean, it didn't take very long for us to understand that, I mean, we don't impact that much, and definitely not in the way we wanted, mainly because the discussion stays Israeli. And there's only so much you can change when you talk to yourself. And therefore, the next idea was to go beyond and try and do something with the people we've been fighting, with Palestinian militants and activists, ex-prisoners, that it so happened in 2004 or 5, when we started building up the group, were also interested in meeting people like us. This was nearly 20 years ago, and the group is still around. I can't say that we achieved the goals that we have set out, but we have created other things and developed other goals, other means, other ideas that lead us ever since. And the main one is really the development of a mutual joint political language that would allow us to struggle together non-violently against the occupation. And as such, We've been doing many things over the years, trying to stress out our joint struggle, our joint future, our joint hopes and losses, if it's a variety of advocacy actions or dialogue meetings, the different commemorations and memorial days that we are hosting. In all of them, we call upon elected officials to come to negotiations for an agreed upon solution. We call for a cessation to violence, understanding that the cause and source of the violence is the Israeli occupation, etc. Like many other organizations, we found ourselves in a great situation of shock and dismay over the event that unfolded since October 7th, that in a certain sense were much worse than anything we could ever imagine, both the Palestinian attack on Israeli civilians and the Israeli genocidal reaction to that. Since then, we've been engaged in a call for an immediate ceasefire, for release of all the prisoners and all the hostages, and however, as I'm sure after nearly 300 days of this, we realize that this is not a very realistic thing to call for, or not the thing that we are able to bring about ourselves. Barring that, we do call for the stop of the sale of offensive weapons, and we call for the sanctions on settlements and on settlement leaders. We call for the implementation of the Lehi law, etc., etc. Now, these things have a direct relation to our work, and in a certain sense, pushing for these things, fighting so that they'll be implemented in the United States. I mean, this is the message that we want to hear. This is the message that we expect to hear. Now, most of our works in Combatants for Peace, in spite of everything I just said, the advocacy, the outreach, most of what we do and what we believe is very important is direct action, on the ground activities in solidarity, in support of local resistance. This is what we've been doing in the past 20 years. And most importantly, this is what we're heavily engaged in right now, in supporting, protecting, escorting, accompanying, or just being in solidarity with Palestinian villagers in the West Bank who are victims of atrocious violence, who are driven from their properties, who are constantly attacked and murdered, bullied, frightened, and otherwise coerced to move, with the full complicity of the Israeli state, of the Israeli army, definitely of the Israeli police, who protect the settlers committing these actions. And by and large, under the kind of cloud of smoke and dust from Gaza, these things go unnoticed. These things do not get the same kind of media coverage. And numerous communities in the West Bank, in the Jordan Valley, were forced to relocate from their position, and we do our very best to be with them, to accompany, to protect, to support whatever we can. We do that in the Jordan Valley, we do that in Bejalla, in Al Mahrour, with the we do it in Masfayata, in South Mount Hebron, in Khan al Ahmar, in many, many, many other places. The place that we believe where, I mean, maybe, I mean, those of you who were in Standing Rock and stuff like that understand the importance of standing together in such a moment. This is in many ways a very ungrateful and a very painful moment, because the power of this kind of nonviolent solidarity when faced with police, with armed settlers, with the army, is very small. What we can usually do is just, well, demonstrate with our bodies our willingness to be there. In order for this to resonate somehow, there needs to be media, there needs to be an outcry and an outroar outside of Israel, the way it worked in the past in Khan al-Ahmar and other places. Another thing that can happen, and another thing that can make a huge difference, is in a certain sense stopping, curtailing, putting an end to the American state support of these things, of these murderous attacks on Palestinians. And the American support comes either directly in the forms of arms and equipment, guns, etc., or indirectly through the funding of alt-right bodies, evangelist bodies, and different kind of loopholes that you have in your taxation and donation laws. And in a sense, intervening there is something extremely important. We can see how important it is that, after 300 days of massacre in Gaza, the Israeli government is not really afraid the United States will stop giving them arms, but they are scared shitless of personal sanctions against them. You can see that this week when our two terrorist ministers, at least one of them, condemned the pogrom that took place in the village of Jit in the West Bank. You can see it when all of a sudden Netanyahu speaks out against these things. You can see what the power that such direct actions, personal actions against these people might have. And so we do think it's extremely, extremely important promoting such things, such actions. And in a sense, it is happening. I mean, the reason that Smotrich, the reason that Netanyahu is afraid is because such sanctions were implemented on violent settlers in the West Bank in an attempt to curtail what is happening right now, in an attempt to somehow control where the Israeli state relinquished all control. Now, of course, this is not some kind of moral gesture. This is not some kind of moral backbone of the American administration. Rather, it's a manner to do something that will allow them to keep supporting the genocidal violence of Israel. But I mean, for us, the morality of these issues shouldn't really matter. There are tools in the American legal system and in the American law book that can really assist us. America has a long history of destabilizing regimes and supporting unsupportable regimes. And as a consequence of that, has numerous laws that are supposed to function as checks and balances to this foreign policy tendency, like the Lehigh law, like the Magnitsky law, I think it's called, the one that is used to sanction to impose sanctions on individuals. These are there, and implementing them on Israel is something that would help us a lot. Now, I'm not an expert or anything like that. The reason that I know about these laws is that we've been trying for nearly 20 years to get the American system, the American political and legal system, to recognize that these laws exist and should be applied to Israel. In 2008, the daughter of our founding member, Bassam Aramin, was murdered with an American bullet shot from an American gun from an American Jeep in the Palestinian refugee camp of Shoafat. We came here in 2008 for a long campaign trying to implement the Lehigh law, saying human rights violation, murder of children is occurring with your weapons, with your tax money. And frankly, we were laughed at. We met Congress members, we met politicians, we met organizers who laughed at us. I mean, said, come on, what are you, children? This is a law for Guatemala. This is a law for Indonesia. It's not a law for Israel. And nobody took us seriously. Recently, as recent as 2021, we called on the American system to implement personal sanctions, not against the two terrorist ministers, terrorist by Israel's definition, convicted of terrorism in Israel, but against Benny Gantz, who is considered the moderate person, who is considered kind of the middle ground between Bibi and whatever. We said he should be sanctioned according to the American law that allows for it after he outlaws 6 human rights organizations and defined them as terrorists. Again, we were laughed at. What, are you ridiculous? This is like a white, blue-eyed general who implants such laws on these people. And going back to what Oren said, I wish we had the gift of foresight. I wish that in 2008 and ever since, we were smart enough to implement these laws, to show Israel that there is accountability, that there is a limit to the way that they behave, that there is a limit to the carte blanche you get when you serve American imperialist interests in the Middle East. And this did not happen, and there we are today. And today there is a huge mobilization, and people talk about the Lehigh Law, and people talk about the personal sanctions. And yeah, this is blessed. Thank you very much. This should be pursued and this should be pushed forward. It's a shame it didn't happen 15 years ago and 50,000 deaths ago. And in a sense, this is the message we want to hear from you. We see you, we hear you, and we are willing to act. And personally, this is, I think, is the place of direct action, of advocacy group, of legislative initiatives, and stuff like that. Elected officials are not brave people. If they were brave people, they would not be elected officials. They are servants, and they need to be shown that their courage will be rewarded, their lack of courage will be punished, that decisions that they believe are unpopular or are unpromotable are the ones that they should stand by. And they hear that through direct action. They hear that through disturbance. They hear that through interventions. They hear that through people disturbing their status quo. And this is, I believe, the role of the American organizations. And this is what we would love to see. Again, there are the organizations like Veterans for Peace who've been showing this to us always. There are others who are joining en masse ever since this horror began. This is what we need. The laws are there. They need to be implemented, and they need to be implemented on Israel. Israel needs to see that there is accountability for the way we behave. Only then will things stop. Only then we will be able to speak of a different future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alec. You covered a lot of ground and gave us a lot to think about. And I deeply appreciate you taking some time to share that with us. We're going to move on to the perspective of a Palestinian American, but not just anyone. VFP is known perhaps better than for anything else we're known for our proficiency and devotion to direct action. And Hueda is one of the leaders of the most recent flotilla. She's someone who's been at the forefront of direct action for Gaza for many years. She's someone who can perhaps call us to courage, perhaps remind us of who we are, and how we've used our own power to change the world and make it a more peaceful place, how we've used that power to oppose the military-industrial complex. Hueda is a Palestinian American activist and lawyer who co-founded the International Solidarity Movement. It's a Palestinian-led organization using nonviolent protest and international pressure to support the Palestinian cause. She was born of 2 Palestinian Christian parents. Her mother is from the West Bank town of Beit Sahur, and her father from Mi'ilia. I hope I got that close to right. A local council in northern Israel. Under Israeli law, she has Israeli citizenship through her father, but she's a Palestinian citizen of Israel. Her parents moved from the West Bank to Detroit, Michigan, which is where she was born, to be able to raise her away from violence in the West Bank. But she and her parents were able to visit Palestine every few years until she was about 10. The International Solidarity Movement is I'm sorry. She was chair of the Free Gaza movement. She was involved in both of the Gaza freedom flotillas, the series of ships carrying pro-Palestinian activists and aid to break the Israeli naval blockade of the Gaza Strip. She was there in 2008. She was there in 2010. Using a satellite phone on board, she has kept communication with the outside. And her message was that they were going to keep going until they either disable the boats or jump on board. In November of 2021, she declared her candidacy for Michigan's 10th congressional district in the 2022 election, but didn't quite make it onto the ballot. But thank you, Hueda, for coming on to help inspire us to action and talk to us about where direct action is making a difference.
Thank you so much, Will. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and for Veterans for Peace for inviting me. I am speaking to you from the contemporary and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe people, the three nations, the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwa, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi peoples, otherwise known as Metro Detroit. And again, I am very honored to be part of this panel. When speaking about nonviolent direct action and the power that it can have, my introduction to it, or my experience with it, came from my time in Palestine. I recognize that my parents sacrificed and left their families behind to come to the United States so that they can raise a family in a place where they could give their children a freedom and opportunity and hopefully equality. And I grew up knowing that, we didn't have a whole lot, but we had enough, and grateful for the sacrifices that my parents made. And after graduating college, really asking myself, how do I give back? I had opportunity that most Palestinians don't have because of what my parents were able to do. But with that opportunity comes responsibility. And so I decided to move to Jerusalem. And at the time, it was to work for a conflict resolution organization. And I saw someone put in the chat mention a camp in Maine. That might be the one that I worked for. And I know that Eric talked about the power of people from opposing sides coming together. It is, but you're going to hear me speak out against it, because what I learned from these programs, or from my time in it, is that they serve as a great distraction from the work that really has to be done to change the realities that really tear people apart. As you've probably heard people say, or Palestinians say over and over again, our problem is not with the Jewish people. And indeed, when I went over to Jerusalem and I was working with Palestinian and Israeli kids, these kids became the best of friends. But then, we take the Israelis home to their towns and cities that are built on the ruins of Palestinian villages, and the Palestinians have to go home to their refugee camps or their villages or cities through checkpoint after checkpoint, under guns, perhaps of the brother and sister of their new Israeli best friend. And these kinds of programs were all about, I have a friend from the other side and we are going to make peace, without actually doing the kind of work that needs to be done to dismantle the systems of oppression that tear people apart. And this is not to say that dialogue and coming together is ever a bad thing, but when it's done in an organized fashion and promoted as the way to peace, it serves to delegitimize what occupied and oppressed people see as their struggle and the tactics and strategies that they are using and what they need for their liberation. And for example, you see a lot of European and US money going to these programs And then when Palestinians engage in various forms of resistance, or in largely non-violent resistance, that is not helpful. We hear when Palestinians in 2004, 2005 launched a global call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions, that is not helpful to the peace process, right? And we see in the United States, specifically over what is it now, 32, 35 states that have legislation to penalize in one way or another, usually not criminally, but in other ways, people that engage in supporting the Palestinian call for boycott. And you otherwise hear sometimes, from sympathetic people that it is not helpful. So the message to Palestinians is that whatever you do is really not helpful. You just have to negotiate with Israel, negotiate with an entity that is intent on getting rid of us. Israel was founded as a settler colonial project, and Israel's founders certainly do not deny that. In fact, back then they boasted about it. It is a settler colonial project that is, and settler colonialism is about replacing the indigenous population. And so over the decades, we've seen the policies that have, if Palestinians weren't killed, then they were squeezed into smaller and smaller areas of land where it became very difficult or almost impossible to stay and to survive and to provide, to raise a family, provide for your family. So Palestinians looking to leave are again being just corralled into a small area of land while Israel takes over the rest. And you probably heard Palestinians say it, this is a genocide, what's happening in Gaza, but it is not new. There has been a slow genocide throughout the decades. This is just an accelerated form of it. I say that because when I went to Palestine and I worked for this organization, after about a year I left, it was the Second Intifada had broken out, and I was participating in Palestinian demonstrations against Israeli occupation policies, and we were getting beaten down. Palestinians were being maimed, arrested, shot and killed with no accountability whatsoever. And the mainstream media was blaming Palestinians for the most part because Palestinians, they walked away from the peace process, a peace process that for 7 years just allowed Israel to continue colonizing the land under a facade of peace. So I left, and I was one of the co-founders of the International Solidarity Movement. And the International Solidarity Movement, I also saw some people posting in the chat about it, was intended to really provide a resource for Palestinian popular resistance by calling people from all over the world to come stand with Palestinians, to be eyewitnesses to what's happening, protective accompaniment, because Israelis have so dehumanized Palestinians that their injuries, their deaths mean nothing to a majority of Israeli soldiers, and certainly to the state, but internationals in there, if it's a mixed demonstrations, perhaps the soldiers wouldn't use such lethal forms of violence. We also wanted to change how the media was talking about what was happening in Palestine. We wanted, if not the mainstream media, at least people who came to Palestine and saw with their own eyes would go back and tell their own communities and help change the narrative through alternative forms of media. And this was before social media, but now we have social media making it that much easier to spread the truth. And we also wanted to, as Alex said, we see you, we hear you, we stand with you. That's a powerful message. And it wasn't getting to Palestinians who are so isolated by the policies of Israel. They are really, if some of you haven't been there, it's hard to really describe just the extent to which Palestinians are at the mercy of the Israeli occupation forces and colonizing forces. Their very movement, what they have access to on a daily basis, whether they can go to school, whether they can go to work on a certain day, is controlled by Israel. Certainly the economy, and that is true for the West Bank, true for Jerusalem, and doubly true for Gaza, not just today, but going back decades. But I believe then strongly that we need to directly confront the Israeli occupation forces. We need to march on checkpoints. We need to try to take apart these roadblocks. We need to confront these Israeli soldiers and send a message to the world. And since I'm talking to a lot of veterans, you know about strategy when you're confronting an oppressive force and you're devising strategy of how we overcome, how to defeat this oppressor. You look at what is supporting this oppressor. How is it able to do what it's doing? And how do I systematically hit at that to weaken it and break the support for the oppressor? And a lot of times, and in different kind of revolutions, you look at trying to actually change and appeal to the humanity of the soldiers on the other side. Is the outside forces, and it's true for Israel, that Israel is supported largely and enabled by the support of the West and certainly of the United States. And at that time, and it's true today, sadly, we didn't think we could really get through to the Israeli soldiers, to the Israeli people. Alec talked a little bit about that in terms of talking to your close circle, but even in demonstrations and attempting to, I remember in one demonstration in the West Bank, actually Palestinians held up mirrors so the soldiers can see themselves, what they look like in heavy armed gear coming to attack villagers with nothing. But that, again, we didn't see or didn't believe at the time that we could really get through to the Israeli soldiers and to Israeli society, because it is from birth to through the years to the education system to when they get into the army. It's a lot of indoctrination about Israel being the victim and Palestinians being violent, being largely terrorists, being out to get Israel. And if they didn't do what they were doing, if they didn't go to the military and oppress Palestinians, then Palestinians would come and attack them and try to drive them into the sea. And this is a lot of what Israeli society is raised on. And if you see, statistics or polls that are done these days, you see that sadly a lot of the majority of Israeli society is supportive of what, I mean, they're calling for a ceasefire, but not because they empathize with Palestinians or they don't want their government to be doing what it's doing. A lot of Israelis think that the Israeli military and the government aren't doing enough in Gaza. So we focused on trying to change, again, the narrative, and by internationals and Palestinians working together to confront the soldiers, confront the checkpoints. In 2011, I was part of a Palestinian freedom ride, tried to ride segregated Israeli buses to get through to the American people about what the nature of the Israeli occupation is, because there isn't an understanding. I don't want to sound like I don't necessarily believe in that anymore, but I will say that what this genocide has shown today has really shown me that I was with a naivete back then, that we could help expose what was happening through this nonviolent direct action, expose what is happening, and the world would act. And that is certainly what we tried to do with our first boats to Gaza that was talked about in the introduction. In 2008, we got 2 small fishing boats, and we had 44 people from 17 countries around the world get on these fishing boats to go confront and break Israel's siege of Gaza. Because as much as human rights organizations were talking about the devastating effect of Israel's complete closure of Gaza, from rising rates of malnutrition, the destruction of the economy, to people dying because they couldn't access medical care, to the number of people who were dependent on handouts on humanitarian aid to survive as a deliberate result of policy, Israeli policy meant to drive Palestinians, bring them to their knees in order to basically exact political concessions from them. That is an illegal policy. International organizations were writing about the effects of it, but nobody was doing anything. And so we thought, we're going to get on these boats and we are going to insist that we have a right to go to Gaza, and this blockade is illegal. And either we get to Gaza, or there's a standoff at sea and Israel attacks us. And if they decide to attack us, at least the world would see that Israel's policy is not about safety. It's not about security. It is about punishing the Palestinian people, because 44 peace activists on 2 fishing boats do not constitute a threat to the state of Israel or its armed forces or anything. We just want to get to Gaza. So if you stop us, this is not about security, like you say. What we were thinking, if Israel attacked us at sea, then it would expose to the world and the world would act. Well, now with this age of social media and what Israel is doing and the live stream genocide that is happening, we're going on the 11th month and it's still happening. So what kind of naivete were we operating under, that if we just kind of expose the world, confront, the world would see and act? Civilians are acting, right? But we are not changing, or we haven't managed to change our government's policies. And so when you get to the situation today, is nonviolent direct action in Palestine, will that work? We are in a situation where there's a genocide going on, and the world is not stopping it. Governments aren't stopping it. And in the West Bank also, there are killings and pogroms on a daily basis, settler rampage, and they are supported by their governments. And we've had some sanctions. Yes, I mean, my husband actually has been working on those sanctions, and they are small steps, but it's not anything that gets to the heart of its Israeli policy, right? It's not the 1 or 2 settlers. So it's small steps, but what are Palestinians, or even Palestinians and internationals in the West Bank, going to do in terms of nonviolent direct action that is going to have an effect, we say? So we still need internationals in the occupied Palestinian territory. And Alec talked about some of the protective accompaniment. Israeli anti-apartheid activists are certainly engaged in that, but so are internationals through the ISM and through a new initiative launched by Palestinians in conjunction with ISM and other organizations that's called Protect Palestine, or FEZA. And if you have any ability to travel to the occupied Palestinian territory, you are very much needed. And at this point, a lot of it's protective accompaniment, which is a form of resistance when you're helping Palestinians to be able to stay on their land, because nearly, I don't even know actually the updated number, but somewhere around 20 or more Palestinian villages have been depopulated since October 7th because of these settler rampages, either direct threats or constant attacks, where Palestinians aren't able to stay anymore. And that is part of the overall policy to get rid of Palestinians. So when internationals or anti-apartheid Israeli peace activists are there, they are documenting, they are, what we hear and what we've seen is serving as a deterrent, because if the Israeli military knows that there's a foreign presence there, they may not attack, or even settlers may not attack. But in order to keep that up and to keep it effective, you need to keep a constant flow, because if are there one day, then they're not there the next day. The settlers will take it out on the Palestinian villages. So we need that to be able to keep Palestinians there. But the bulk, I believe, and people might disagree with me, but from the years of doing this work and looking at the situation where we are, I believe that the focus has to be internationally, has to be specifically here in the United States. And that is honestly what Palestinians have been telling us for decades. So when internationals would come through, Palestinians would be incredibly grateful, but they would tell internationals, like, thank you for being here, but go home to your country, tell people what you see, and help change the policy. Help change the policy, because that needs to happen before we can be free. So what are we doing here? There has been a lot going on, and you know it, so I'm not going to go over it, but that is very inspirational, especially the student encampments, a lot of the shutdowns, just a great show of people power and solidarity that is changing hearts and minds, or opening eyes. That's very important. But we have also this window now where I think that our actions can be even more effective in terms of applying pressure, because we are getting close to the elections. And I am going to Chicago tomorrow morning to the DNC for two purposes: one, to participate in the protests, and one, to be inside because I'm an uncommitted delegate. And uncommitted, what is it trying to do, or what are we trying to do? To show the administration that, look, hundreds of thousands, we had over 700,000 people vote uncommitted because they are dissatisfied with the administration's policy, and they are not going to get out and vote for a administration or a person that is enabling genocide. So you need to change if these people are going to mobilize. And a lot of these people, over 101,000 of them, are in the swing state of Michigan, where I am. And so that is a policy of working from the inside of the Democratic Party to say, look, we don't want Trump. We want you to prevail, but we are not going to tell anyone to get out and vote for you if you do not change policy. If you do not, and right now the call is for an arms embargo. And I saw someone else in the chat saying that they are hosting a protest or an event for Not Another Bomb, which is, protests are happening all over tomorrow in the lead up to the DNC, Not Another Bomb, again, to send this message to the administration. And now is a unique time where the Democrats, at least, are concerned. And certainly it is in some of these swing states, but it's not just, it can't be a message, and it hasn't been. But I think we need to send it stronger, that it's not just Arabs and Palestinians, Muslims. No, it is American people of conscience everywhere. And so as much as we can send this message that we are not vote, if you don't change policy, we are withholding our vote, that could be really a strong incentive for the Harris campaign to indicate that they will change course. And maybe even for this administration, for Biden, in the months that he has left, also to change course, because they tell us now, right, where it's not just a call for a ceasefire, right? Because now Biden says he supports a ceasefire. Kamala Harris says she supports a ceasefire. Last week in Arizona, as she was talking about working night and day for a ceasefire, on the very day that the United States approved another $3.5 billion in arms to Israel, is gaslighting us. You're not working night and day for a ceasefire when you continue to send weapons to the entity that will not agree to a ceasefire and continues to bomb and slaughter Palestinians in Gaza. So it needs to be more than just words. These words are not going to save lives. And uncommitted is kind of working from the inside, but all of the protests and the interruptions and where Kamala and any policymaker, wherever they go, are being interrupted with these calls for stop arming Israel, that needs to continue also, in my opinion. As I said, I'm going to be part of both as much as we can do that, because really, if the United States did not provide Israel with the impunity that it has been, not just now, but for decades, and it has been that impunity and that reliance, Israeli reliance on this impunity, that the United States would not only continue to send them weapons, but defend them from international sanction, defend them from any kind of accountability in an international arena, and not just when it comes to the UN or the international fora, but also use its pressure and influence when we're talking about other states that might take action against Israel, because the United States wields a lot of economic and other power, and they use it to keep other states from sanctioning Israel. But with some states, we are seeing the power in those countries are overcoming. And there are states that have already called for or already implemented an arms embargo on Israel. So we need to keep up that pressure 100%. I would say, let me just end with saying what I talked about, or the hesitancy, or maybe the what I might have conveyed to you would be not so much a belief in the power of nonviolent direct action in Palestine. No, but I do think when you're looking strategically, like, that is limited. Palestinians do need international civilians, global civil society action in order to help end the occupation, help end the colonization, because especially those of us in countries in the United States that are complicit, that are enabling it, Israel has all of this international state power on its side. And so Palestinians need international civilian power on their side. And I personally believe that that can be a more powerful force than all of the weapons in the world. And I say that honestly, but we have to believe it's so. And, recently, one of the tools I hope we use, a lot of times I didn't talk about it, but I am an international human rights attorney. And a lot of people ask me about how we can use the law. The law is a tool. We had not only the ICJ decision on genocide, or the preliminary rulings that have come out with regard to Israel's actions and genocide, but we had last month an important ruling that came out. And don't let anyone tell you that this is a non-binding ruling. In a sense, it is, because there isn't an adversarial situation here. It's not a case of one state versus the other. It was the United Nations that asked the International Court of Justice for opinion on the state of the law. And that opinion is far-reaching, and it basically affirms what Palestinians have been saying for decades in terms of the illegality of the settlements, that Israel is practicing apartheid and racial segregation, that the settlements need to end immediately. And very important to me, like, one of the most important things I saw in there is this affirmation of Palestinian right to self-determination. And that right is not contingent on Israeli conditions. Because the United States always says negotiations, and everything else, or the ICJ decision and the ICC, and that is not helpful to negotiations and a two-state solution, and blah, blah, blah. The International Court of Justice has said that the state of international law, which is binding, is that Palestinian right to self-determination is enshrined in the UN Charter, and it is non-negotiable. It is not subject to Israel, any condition that Israel puts on it. It is not subject to negotiations or any kind of peace process. Palestinians are entitled to it now. Israel must end its illegal occupation of the West Bank, including Jerusalem and Gaza. All states have an obligation not to recognize the illegal situation that Israel has created, and have an obligation to take action to help bring the illegal situation to an end as quickly as possible. So let's use that to continue pressuring and educating and disrupting as much as we can, because Palestinians are counting on us. Thank you for being here, for your attention, and for everything that you do.
Wow. Thank you, Hueda. That was really, really powerful stuff. And I wanted to seize something that I saw in the chat while you were speaking, which was just somebody recognizing how grateful we ought to be that you are going to be one of the voices that can reach the Democratic delegation and that convention, and that your voice will be present there to share this message, because your message is extremely powerful and extremely moving. And I want to just drill in on the policy, your insistence that we have to change the policy, we have to stop the flow of arms, because it brings us to our third speaker. So when I first envisioned this group of speakers, I had hoped Hassan El Tayyab would be able to join us. And Hassan is somebody who I have a huge admiration for. Year after year, first as director of Chicago area peace action, then as co-director of Just Foreign Policy, and then finally at FCNL, he did the work of herding cats. He pulled together disparate parts of the peace movement and got us all focused on Yemen. Year after year, he encouraged us to educate and agitate and lobby around Yemen, and specifically around an annual bill to try to stop U.S. support for the Saudi-led offensive there. So 5 years ago, about 250,000 Yemeni civilians were dying every year through starvation, bombing, or an engineered cholera epidemic. We in the peace movement have this tendency to forget that our work makes a difference and that it can make a difference, that we actually do have power. And Hassan is one of my heroes because he really gave us a recent reminder that's not always true, that sometimes we have huge power. He kept organizing Vets for Peace and Peace Action and AFSC and all these groups around the country and getting everybody into lobby their representatives, doing public education, continuing to talk about Yemen, which is something the media did not want to talk about. And he never won the vote on this bill that he was pushing every year. It was every year this supplemental would go through, and he couldn't stop it. And it felt like defeat after defeat, but he kept us working, and those margins got closer and closer. And then finally, the Saudis realized that they were going to lose their supply of US weapons. And when they realized that it was heading that way, they decided they had to come to the negotiating table. And in the intervening years, it's, by the numbers, we can estimate that well over 500,000 civilians are alive today because we did that work. And so when Hassan said, I'm not the best person to speak to your group about how we have a legislative path to actually change the policy and stop the flow of weapons, I was a little incredulous. But then I started going to the weekly meetings of the ceasefire coalition that Odelia is leading, and got to see her doing her work. And I realized Hassan, I shouldn't have been surprised, but Hassan was right that there was a speaker who can talk to us about policy with more authority and direction, perhaps even than Hassan himself. So I want to introduce Odelia Mater. Like us, she's a veteran. She's a veteran of the IDF, and she's devoted herself to using her voice to push for a more peaceful future. She's a program associate on Middle East policy at FCNL. That's the Friends Committee on National Legislation. She graduated from Sapir College in, Sadrat? Oh, probably close there. She has a bachelor's in journalism. In 2022, she co-founded Negev Media, an organization promoting representational and solution-based media regarding the Arab Bedouin struggle for human rights and the recognition of unrecognized villages in the Negev. She has served as the field and media coordinator for Negev Coexistence Forum and Civility Equality. That's an organization aiming to achieve full civil rights and equality for all residents of Negev. Since 2020, she's been a teaching fellow with the Forum for Regional Thinking, a think tank aiming to bring about change in the way the Israeli public perceives the Middle East, and encouraging critical thought and a complex discourse in the region. I think right now the whole Amnesty International and most of the big peace organizations are following Odelia's lead in this weekly ceasefire call and looking to her for legislative leadership. And it's a tough time to be providing that, but I think Odelia is doing a great job of it. And I've been so impressed having the opportunity to see you work through that committee and herd the cats and do that hard work and try to give us those moments where we have a handhold on policy and can change the direction of our government and try to stem this flow of weapons. So Odelia, the yeoman's work of trying to tell us how we can actually move this recalcitrant system to stop the genocide falls to you. So take it away.
Wow.
First, what a build up. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak here as well as with such established speakers as Elik and Hueda. I think that they've already made some really incredible suggestions, and I urge people to, follow through with them. And if you see direct action or on the ground action or international action, as I believe really crucial work, as well as our work. I think they don't contradict each other. I think they complement each other, and I hope that we work together in the future. I'll give a brief introduction of myself just for some context, then I'll talk a bit about the work on the Saudi-led coalition war on Yemen and famine in Yemen and the advocacy work that Will and my boss Hassan were a part of, and then a bit on how that applies to our work today, calling for a ceasefire, embargo of weapons to Israel, restoration of UNRWA funding, and surge of humanitarian aid into Gaza. So first, I'll just say that I was born and raised in Jerusalem, in a Jewish Israeli home that was in part religious Zionist and extremely conservative. And after my military service, I was in the education unit teaching none other than a 60-hour course called Zionism, so a military-oriented history of Israel. I decided when I was released to confront issues around the occupation and learn what has been denied of me and every Israeli, for that matter, who has been through the Israeli education system, exposed to mainstream Israeli media, or served in the military, which is basically information and a sense of compassion, empathy, even rational thought towards millions of Palestinians living under oppressive regime. For me, literally across the street from where I grew up, on the cusp between Jewish Jerusalem and Palestinian Jerusalem, I had citizenship, and my neighbors were completely stateless without access to basic human rights. And I had never known that, which I think personally is quite embarrassing. Over the years, and just trying to unfold and unlearn decades of indoctrination, I was brought to work in advocacy, media and journalism, as well as grassroots activism in the West Bank, and also studying in Sapir. I lived in Beersheba, which is southern Israel, Palestine. I wanted to focus my work on the Negev Nakab region, where, as Will mentioned, I worked with several Bedouin communities. Most of the Bedouins today identify as Palestinian, who live about 150,000 live in 37 unrecognized villages. They're unrecognized by the state of Israel. And because of this lack of recognition, they are denied access to agricultural land, water and electricity, sewage and garbage disposal infrastructure, paved roads, and so much more. Israel's quote unquote solution for these Bedouin communities' plea for land, or just equal access to live a dignified life, is to concentrate as many Bedouins on as little land as possible in the form of 7 dense and extremely poor townships. This population, regardless of being citizens of Israel, live under an apartheid regime. So I just want to state, before I go on to talk about the war in Gaza, settler violence in the West Bank, there's often an argument that you'll hear about Israel not being an apartheid regime because these two separate laws are not instated on citizens of a state. The Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza are not citizens of Israel, and therefore you cannot call it an apartheid. So I just want to provide you on a platter that counter argument, which is very, very easy to make, and you can happy to answer any questions about the Arab Bedouin struggle for human rights in the Nakab as well. And for the past 5 years, while living in southern Israel, Palestine, I'd been working in education for Israeli youth on the occupation. I've led tours in the unrecognized villages in the Negev Nakab, worked on media representation of Palestinian struggles throughout the land, and Israeli government-facing advocacy, but felt that the uphill battle was too steep and reaping too little benefits. I believe, unfortunately, that the Israeli public, without fundamental political change or international pressure, cannot shift its perspective quickly enough, and watched an escalation of 18-year-old Israelis from year 1 of teaching them to year 5 of teaching them express a genocidal intent more and more openly year by year in a really horrific trajectory of being enabled to to speak even these intentions out loud. I think the government is made up of a coalition of people openly expressing genocidal intent on a daily basis with no consequence. And Israeli mainstream media, as we say in Hebrew, is meguyas, or conscripted to the Israeli military, and that the military's word is taken without question in reporting, and the military reportedly can do no harm. Considering all of these, I decided to move to the US in September and use the privilege, sheer privilege of having both Israeli and American citizenship to speak to where it matters most, the US government. I've heard from the previous speakers, Elik and Hueda, that you two have done this work and have learned that it is a very steep uphill battle as well. But I will say, in comparison to work on the ground, I have felt that there is more room here to move legislation than any of the previous work I have done. So a month after I moved, the war in Gaza began. And before jumping and talking about our work in this past almost a year around this devastation in Gaza, I want to give, again, just a brief overview of the successful, albeit long, process of legislative advocacy around the Saudi-led coalition war in Yemen. And I'm really fortunate to work in the Middle East department at FCNL on a team of two. It's myself and my awesome boss, Hassan El-Tayab, who has led some incredible advocacy efforts on this with a coalition of a diversity of organizations, such as Vets for Peace, such as the Peace Action, calling to end US complicity in the war and famine in Yemen. So we'll mention, but in 2015, Saudi Arabia joined forces with the UAE and formed a coalition of 9 Arab countries that was backed by the United States, UK, France, and Canada, and started this war. Saudi Arabia, this will be familiar to all of the people on this call, they framed the conflict in sectarian terms, insisting that Iran was supporting the Houthis in Yemen, and therefore they need to overthrow the Houthis. And in March 2015, they began conducting airstrikes, imposing a naval blockade against Yemen, and indiscriminately targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure. The UN estimated that by the end of 2021, the war in Yemen led to the deaths of at least 377,000 Yemenis, both indirectly being killed by Saudi airstrikes and in the famine and disease spreading in Yemen. And over 16 million Yemenis were pushed to the edge of famine. Over 60% of these deaths were due to disruptions in access to food, water, and medicine. The Saudi-led coalition had received almost unwavering military support and weapons from the US. That included targeting assistance and logistical support for coalition airstrikes, mid-air refueling for Saudi warplanes, spare parts transfers, and billions of dollars in weapon sales. Congressional pressure, among other things, led to a chain of events where in February 2021, Biden announced that the US would end support for the Saudi-led coalition offensives in Yemen. Unfortunately, the administration did not clearly define what constitutes offensive operations, and the US has attacked Yemen directly since the war in Gaza began, and Houthi attacks started in the Red Sea. Nonetheless, it is worth noting that there have been no Saudi airstrikes on Yemen for 2 years. And there were fundamentally 3 key votes from 2016 to 2022 that ended US direct support for Saudi mid-air refueling. In 2016, the administration notified Congress on a Saudi tank deal, and senators, namely Durbin and Murphy, forced a vote on the annual bill, the National Defense Authorization Act, to block this tank sale. The vote did not pass, like Will mentioned, but it did garner 26 votes. Some members were fired up about this issue independently, while others were directly advocated by folks like yourself. So here the power started to build up. In August of 2018, it was discovered that a Saudi-fired bomb that killed 40 children in Yemen was supplied by the US. In early October, Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi was killed in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. And because the war in Yemen escalated, Senator Sanders pushed for a Yemen war powers resolution, basically a privilege resolution in the Senate that seeks to remove direct, unauthorized involvement of US armed forces in the war between the Saudi coalition and the Houthis. This vote also didn't pass, but it garnered 44 bipartisan supporters. In late 2018, because the Yemen War Powers Resolution was already teed up, Sanders forced a vote again, and this time got 56 votes with 7 Republicans on board. So the bill passed the Senate. That same day, Trump stated that the Senate cannot stop him from stopping mid-air refueling and that they'll do it anyways. But simultaneously and behind the scenes, then Secretary of Defense Mattis pushed the Saudis to de-escalate strikes. There were also 3 joint resolutions of disapproval, or JRDs, on weapons sales. Again, a Senate privileged vote to block weapons sales notified to Congress to Saudi and the UAE that passed both chambers of Congress. And these resolutions would ultimately block weapons sales. And of course, Trump vetoed these resolutions. Something Hassan noted to me earlier was that altogether during Trump's administration, 5 of the 8 bills that he had vetoed were related to war powers resolutions and joint resolutions of disapprovals on weapons deals to the UAE and Saudi, bills that anti-war advocates pushed for. And he told me to give a special shout out to New Hampshire Peace Action, led by Will Hopkins here on this call, and to Vets for Peace and so many other orgs for helping these bills follow through with Republican support as well. Eventually, the US did stop mid-air refueling without passing a bill first. The Saudis significantly released bombing of Yemen, and we saw a major reduction in hostilities. The UAE removed military presence in much of the region. So we saw this mechanism wherein policy can change without a bill passing. Nonetheless, in 2019, another war powers bill was voted on and passed both chambers, led by Senator Sanders and Representative Ro Khanna. Congress finally enacted the War Powers Resolution, and Trump signed it into law, instating a mid-air refueling ban that passed as a provision in the NDAA. Again, in 2021, when Biden was elected, one of his main foreign policy speeches was on Yemen and the need to stop offensive weapons sales, stop significant arms sales to Saudi. He lifted the foreign terrorist organization designation on the Houthis, lifted prohibition on US aid funding in northern Yemen. Shortly thereafter, there was a Ramadan truce, and since then, Saudi hasn't bombed Yemen in over 2 years. Goes without saying, there are escalations now in Yemen that need to be addressed, and we are addressing those. I don't want to paint a picture that the efforts are finished and that the job is done and that Yemen is back to these people who are suffering of famine receiving the aid that they need. The situation has actually intensified since the war in Gaza began, which actually accentuates our job of the importance of calling for a ceasefire in Gaza as the 0.0 of escalations in the Red Sea and in Yemen. But I do want to say that what I just laid out for you now would not have happened without the inside-outside strategy. There were Republicans, Democrats, right-wing, left-wing, Yemenis, veterans, Americans pushing this every step of the way. And again, orgs like Peace Action, Vets for Peace, and so many more who worked so hard. The pressure that Congress can actually generate is huge and applies to what I'll mention now in the form of the UNRWA bill, ceasefire and weapons embargo efforts. We don't necessarily have to pass bills into law for foreign policy change. And although there are differences between US-Israel and US-Saudi relations, Hassan told me that people were telling him the same things then that they're telling him now, which is don't even try or bother to change this relationship because it is impossible. So now we know the tools to use: the joint resolutions of disapproval, war powers resolutions, letters, pushing members to speak out for a ceasefire, no weapons, and humanitarian aid and UNRWA restoration. So when the war began on October 7th, one of the first things that we did was start a coalition. Will had mentioned it's called the Ceasefire Now Coalition. And all of the organizations who are in the coalition agree upon one thing, which is the immediate need for permanent and unconditional ceasefire. When I say unconditional, I mean that a ceasefire cannot be called for with a condition to eliminate Hamas, as that is an unattainable goal and justifies a never-ending war. The coalition today consists of well over 100 national organizations, including vets groups, faith groups, advocacy and lobby groups, think tanks, humanitarian aid operators, grassroots orgs, and more. And one of the first actions we took was sending a letter to Congress on October 16th, signed by over 80 national orgs calling for a ceasefire. On this letter were about 26 church denominations. There were synagogues, Jewish groups, Muslim groups, interfaith groups that represented tens of millions of Americans. We continued lobbying offices for months with representation from across the board, that is Palestinian Americans with family in Gaza, humanitarian aid operators bearing eyewitness from the ground or doctors who've returned from missions, family members of Israeli hostages being held captive in Gaza, faith groups, vet groups, and more. And to date, we have reached just short of 100 members of Congress calling for an unconditional and permanent ceasefire. You can see which names are on that list on fcnl.org/ceasefire tracker. There's also ceasefiretracker.com that we are partners on. And of course, as mentioned before on this call, a ceasefire calls for a ceasefire, verbal condemnation of Israel have not amounted to change on the ground. And we recognize that real leverage must be used to apply pressure on the Israeli government. And that real pressure comes in the form of conditioning or halting all weapons to Israel. I think like Elik said earlier on this call, Netanyahu and his genocidal government are not afraid that the US will stop sending it weapons, but that is our goal. We want to instill that fear and pressure. And so I want to say that the groundwork has been placed by people like Elik and Hueda, who are on this call, and others who've put infinite work to educate Congress and advocates about US laws, particularly, that are broken every day by continuing to supply Israel with weapons. I also want to mention, Hueda, you mentioned the $3.5 billion for weapons that the US notified last week. The US also notified 5 other weapons sales to Israel. I think this was on Thursday, amounting to $20 billion more, which is absolutely devastating. But one legislative tool that we saw to drop the hammer on Congress and create real pressure that advocates helped to implement was a bill sponsored by Senator Sanders. It was SRES 504. Which would invoke Section 502B of the Foreign Assistance Act. This is a rarely used law that requires the State Department to submit a report to Congress within 30 days on the human rights conditions of a country to which the US provides aid. On this vote, which was the first vote in US history that I had heard and researched about that questions the conditionality of weapons to Israel, there were 12 senators in support of the vote. Other efforts have been made to call to halt or condition weapons to Israel in the form of letters, in the form of smaller legislative tools. And to date, 130 members of the US Congress have called to condition weapons to Israel by various means. Those are, again, the letters, amendments to supplemental packages, and public statements saying that US law is being violated. I don't want to undermine the horror that is happening on the ground, but I do want to say that Elik and Hueda, when you were doing Congress-facing work, and I imagine that you still do, but in the past, 130 members of Congress calling to condition weapons to Israel was unheard of. And so I would point that as a success, albeit small, albeit doesn't help people on the ground directly, but we are on a long path forward, and that is a success. Next, we have been working adamantly on the restoration of UNRWA funding after a ban was initiated by both Congress and the administration following allegations of a number of individual employees of UNRWA participating in the October 7th attacks. To date, Israel has not provided feasible evidence to support these claims. Despite that, UNRWA immediately terminated the contracts of all of these people, those who at least remained alive, because 2 had been killed already. The UN launched an investigation with recommendations to UNRWA that were implemented immediately. UNRWA, for those who aren't extremely familiar with UNRWA, they are the backbone of all aid delivery operations on the ground. Continuing to block US funding to UNRWA doesn't just impact civilians in Gaza, it impacts millions of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, in the West Bank. And after prompt action by UNRWA and the UN, and as additional facts have come to light, all other 15 donor countries that suspended their support to UNRWA have resumed funding. So ultimately, the US is the only country that has not yet restored UNRWA funding. So a legislative tool that we are pushing on now is a forthcoming bill. It should be introduced in the coming weeks. It is being led by Reps Carson, Jayapal, and Schakowsky that would lift the ban on UNRWA funding and restore funding immediately. The bill also emphasizes the crucial nature of UNRWA's work. And although, and this is an important point in relation to the work that has already been done on the Saudi-led coalition war in Yemen, the bill may or may not pass. We are not sure if it will pass. We don't have all of the Democrats on our side. We have people who believe that the UN is a terrorist entity in the US Congress today, and that is not just Republicans saying so. But although the bill may not pass, we need as many members as possible to support this bill to apply that pressure on a coming elected president to restore UNRWA funding. And to date, there are 53 original co-sponsors, and we are advocating at the moment for more. Actively next week, there will be more and more meetings to get more people on this bill. There are also efforts to condition funding and weapons to Israel, namely at the moment, and in the shadow of this horrific notification of another $20 billion worth of weapons to Israel. We are pushing for a joint resolution of disapproval, or a JRD, that had been implemented in the past on weapons to Saudi on a bundle of these weapons. And we have some members who are giving us promising messaging that they will do so. Again, we hope champion offices will force this JRD, and when they do, we need to garner as many votes as possible from the Senate, building that power that I'd mentioned before. I kind of want to end with a couple things about how when the war broke out, and I asked Hassan, my awesome boss, with experience pushing Congress to actually act in favor of humanity rather than death and greed, what on earth can we do? He told me, prep for a marathon and not a sprint. We are in the first miles of this marathon, and I want to just say that something that has helped me through this work, wake up every morning and feel like what I am doing is the best that I can, is that there are two frames to look at advocacy work through. And one, the situation on the ground is absolutely devastating, but we have no choice but to keep fighting for justice and an end to this horror. Two, there has been unprecedented change in the public discourse in the United States, wherein millions of Americans have expressed that they want a ceasefire now and an end to blind US support for Israel, blunt war crimes, and genocide. And there has also been, although far too little, efforts to actually halt or condition weapons to Israel. This has never happened to this extent before. We are seeing people organize not just in advocacy efforts in our Ceasefire Now coalition, but also around electoral power, like who I then mentioned, the Uncommitted movement, trying to overcome lobby groups investing tens of millions of dollars in primary elections of members outspoken on Palestine. This is such incredibly important work. I would say another small pin and a tiny success that I see is when AIPAC feels that they need to invest $13 million in a primary election, the most expensive primary election in US history. That is a good sign. That is a really good sign. Spill as much of your cash as possible on these primary elections, but we are here for the long run. We are seeing students all over the US, all over the world in encampments expressing stubborn and committed solidarity with Palestinians and frankly with humanity. And we are doing the work that we can in our ways, and we will continue to do this work until we see justice. I'm really inspired by the previous speakers here today. I am in awe of your work and your long-standing commitment to this cause, and I am grateful for the opportunity to do the work that I'm doing now and in coalition with people like yourselves. So thank you very much, everyone, and happy to be a resource on this moving forward.
Thank you so much, Odelia. And before I close us out, and we are out of time, so we're not going to be able to get to the questions. I did want to mention that there were requests in the chat for some bill numbers and also some of the websites you mentioned. You might have to scroll up to find them, but if you could, I know you've been made a co-host so that you can do that in the chat. But to all three of you, I want to say thank you so much for inspiring courage, inspiring hope, inspiring the drive necessary to get this done, reminding us that it's not a sprint, that it is a marathon, that we have to keep going, we have to keep working, that we can't give up. It's okay to be tired, it's okay to take breaks, and then you get back on it and you keep making those calls. And all three of you, in your own words, were able to inspire me to that, and I hope that you've helped all of us come to greater state of action. So I'll turn it back over to Susan with my deep gratitude to the three of you for bringing your wisdom to us.
Thank you so much for the very powerful and wonderful and important information and discussion, and certainly reminding us, Veterans for Peace, of our responsibilities as these people who live in this country, who have the responsibility to organize with you at the Democratic National Convention, to keep going to Congress, and to keep organizing our groups that go to those military industrial complexes that produce the armaments, that we will continue to work with you to struggle against this government and to say to our government, you are supposed to recognize us, and we are against the genocide that is going on in the Middle East, in Gaza, on the West Bank. Every day we hear the stories, and they're terrifying to us, and certainly for those of us who have been involved in this struggle for 50, 60 years, we continue to say we need to stop, ceasefire now. And for many of us, we go back to Vietnam when we said ceasefire, and a reminder that we, as part of working together with the people in Vietnam, did have a ceasefire. So we will continue to work with you to say not in our name, and to the politicians, and certainly to those running for Congress or the presidency now. We work with you. Our heart, our soul, our vote, our actions will be with you as we also work to stop the carnage that's going on. And I'll say, in the name of the United States government, as I said many years ago to the Vietnamese, I apologize on behalf of the American people and this government. We need to stop it. Whether it's votes, whether it is confronting the politicians, or whether it's the actions in the streets and against those industries producing armaments, we will stop it. We have done that before. So as you all said, we're in this for the long-term struggle. And thank you so much for coming and speaking before us today to Veterans for Peace. I would next like to introduce you to a young, and I'm sorry, Joy, right? Because in my age, I guess I can say a young American military graduate of the United States Air Force Academy. Thank you for becoming a conscientious objector. It's an honor to have you here tonight, too. And I'll introduce Joy by saying she is a 2023 USAFA graduate who is part of the growing movement of active duty service members who stand against the violence happening in Gaza, funded by our tax dollars and government's complicity. That Joy understands firsthand how difficult it can be to break out of the mindset of the military. And thank you again for hoping to encourage others to critically examine the nature of their service. I see this as the beginning of what we can do, we United States veterans of the military and active duty can do to protest what, in fact, this government and this country is doing in Gaza. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for having me, and it's honestly such an honor to be here. I feel a little starstruck right now, following those three great presentations. I had a very difficult time, kind of deciding what to say to everybody here, what I could say. So I thought I would just give a brief overview of my story and a brief overview of all the work that people at Veterans for Peace, people like Larry Vaughn, who spoke yesterday, and how they had an impact on helping me deconstruct a mindset that had been probably 6 years in the making. So I remember when I was first applying, growing up as a post 9/11 child, because I was born maybe about a month before 9/11. We grow up and we're taught to hate terrorists from a very early age. And I've been realizing how much of an effect that has had on my mindset surrounding Gaza, surrounding Palestine, surrounding that kind of struggle. We never ask why. When our teachers tell us, well, terrorists hate America, we never ask why. We just accept that and move on. And that was the kind of mindset. And I grew up Protestant Christian, so I believed all those things about, God loves that other person across the ocean, but he probably would also like self-defense and things like that. This is how I grew up thinking. And this is the mindset that I entered the academy with. One of the questions I was asked during my application was, say you're a pilot and you're given an order to destroy a building with women and children in it, as well as weapons of mass destruction that are going to be used against the American people. How do you respond to that? And of course, there was a correct answer to this, because we aren't entering the academy to be peace lovers. We're not entering the academy to be diplomats. We're entering to be war makers. So what I answered, of course, was, if it came down to it, I would do it. I didn't question whether I actually could as a person. I didn't question whether it was moral. I knew it was the answer they wanted to hear. And it was the answer that I believed at the time. And it didn't really show to me how prevalent that mindset was until I got to the academy, got through it. I'm sure everybody everybody here has heard at least one or two Jodies that really glorifies violence. The one I remember singing as a basic cadet during my first summer at the academy, I remember singing a song that went a little bit like, first came the Revolutionary War, killing redcoats more and more. They were also ready to die so early in the morning. We're conditioned from day one to glorify violence, to participate in violence. And that was something that was emphasized throughout my academy career. We are war fighters. We are in the profession of arms. Waging war is a career, a profession for us. And even though we had classes on ethics, even though we had classes on the law of war, this was so completely overtaken by this mindset. And I'll give one more example from the academy. I remember, I think it must have been as a junior. I remember sitting in an auditorium with a group of 1,000 cadets. That was about the size of a single class, my entire class. I don't even remember what this speech was about. But they put up real feed of drone strikes. I was sitting there in the auditorium watching little pixelated people run around. And every single time a cloud of dust exploded on the screen, we all cheered, we all clapped. And my husband reminded me of this probably about a few months ago. And he said, that was effed up, right? And I was like, yes, that was very effed up. How could we have, as an institution, gotten to a place where we can cheer at the death and destruction of other people? Drone warfare operators are some of the greatest number of victims to mental health issues because of the moral dissonance that comes from being able to kill people so easily and go home and sleep in your bed at night. But that was the kind of mindset that was instilled in us at the academy, and that was the kind of mindset that it took, that was so deeply rooted and planted inside of me, to the point where when October 7th happened, I graduated from the academy. I came here to graduate school in Georgia. I was happy about finishing out my commitment. I still thought I was doing the right thing by being in the military. And then October 7th happened, of course, and I was with, I would say at the time, the majority of military people who might have seen a little bit of America's struggle against terrorism, also reflected in how Israel responded. It responded to this terrorist attack. And that stayed with me for so long, that even as I started seeing more footage coming out of Gaza, even as I was seeing the horrendous pictures that were trying to get me to understand what the necessary consequences of war that we had said, we had accepted, that we would be able to perpetuate these civilian casualties that just had to happen because we need to win war for whatever reason. It was months of waiting around, waiting for these images to change me, and I avoided it as long as I could. And then Aaron Bushnell self-immolated in February. That was my first kind of light moment where I was like, maybe I should be looking into this. I respect military members' opinions, and that was one of the big reasons that my thinking started to shift ever so slightly away from, well, a defending nation should do whatever they need to do to defend themselves. And that was when I started thinking, well, if military members are starting to stand against this, well, then maybe I should be looking into this. And so I did, and I started looking a little bit deeper. And then the student protests in April happened. And I decided to myself, well, if students are also standing on this side of the issue, well, then they must be onto something, because students are always on the right side of history. And as historically speaking, I truly believe that students are always on the right side of history. And so when I started looking into this, I realized that everything I learned at the academy was starting to unravel. Everything that I had learned about ethics, about the rule of law, about how we should conduct a just war, everything was just being burned to shreds by what Israel is doing against Palestinian people. And to see what I thought was once such an obvious standard to meet, what I thought was so clear at the time, was being ignored, not only by the international community, but by our own government. The same government that I had signed up to be the enforcement arm of overseas, because the military is the enforcement arm of the US government and foreign policy. I knew I was a part of that. To see them supporting this was absolutely horrifying to me. And it was, and I want to call out a couple of people if they're here. I don't know if they are, but Jeff Sumner and Marconi, I didn't catch his last name, from the Atlanta chapter of VFP. I met them at a student protest, and they're the ones who really helped put me on this path to peace, to pushing for peace, to lay down my arms, lay down my profession as a war maker, and try to adopt a profession of peacemaking. They're the ones who really helped me understand. They gave me the community I needed. They met me where I was at, where I was confused. I didn't know what to do. And they're the ones who told me that I could apply for conscientious objection if I disagreed with what my government was doing, and if I no longer wanted to be a part of the US war machine. So that all this happened back in around April, May timeframe. And then July came around. I'm still going back and forth deciding what I want to do. And once again, people from Veterans for Peace reached out to me, got in conversation with me, asked me what I was doing, what I was thinking. And it was because of people in this organization that I finally had the courage to say that I was done. I'm done with war. I am done supporting this government. I'm done being silent on the atrocities that are happening against the Palestinian people right now, against the genocide that is happening against the Palestinian people. I'm finished with it. And so you all might notice that I'm a little bit of a new addition. I just started getting active about a month ago, but I guess what I'm trying to get out of this whole conversation is a big thank you to all of you for helping me see what the right path is, for helping me see the true path to peace in this world. Because without you all, I would still be in the military. I would still be offering my talents as an engineer for the Department of Defense. I would still be helping our government send bombs over to kill innocent people. And I cannot thank you all enough for having me here. And I cannot overstate how honored I am and how much I am reminded that I stand on the shoulders of giants when I come and address you all. And it brings me so much hope and brings me so much joy to see this kind of community that I now get to be a part of, and that I get to participate in. And hopefully here's to another however many years of encouraging the next generation of people, even one more person in each generation, until everybody comes to the decision on their own to be able to lay down their arms and push for peace instead of violence.
Thank you, Joyce. It's wonderful to have you join us. And as we've all seen in the chat, we'll work with you and certainly support you as you move forward through your process applying for CO status. So please call on us, count on us. We need you. We need you, the younger generation, to work together with us, who have been struggling, fighting, working together for many years, because together, I really do believe we can be successful and we can change this culture of war and peace and harm to people. So welcome, Joy. And at that, I'd like to introduce Josh Shirley, who is Vice President of Veterans for Peace, co-founder of the VIP chapter in Fresno, California, and is chair of the awards committee of Veterans for Peace. Josh, thank you. You're up.
All right, thanks, Susan. So before we get into the music later on, and before we hear from the cash cadre in just a little while, it's time for the awards portion of our program. So as Susan mentioned, I'm involved in a few aspects of VFP, different committees and things. And I have to say the awards committee is probably the one with the hardest decision-making, because it involves, going through the accolades of so many of our members and picking out just a few to be specially recognized, which means, others are not being recognized. And that's exceedingly difficult to do. Nevertheless, we're carrying on with the tradition of these annual awards. So we have 4 individuals receiving awards tonight and one chapter. All right. And we are running a little behind on time, so we'll try to keep this moving along. Okay. So the way this will work, I will read out the award, and then the person that nominated their peer, their comrade for the award, is going to say a few words about the awardee, and then we'll give the person a little time to come on and say a few words, although we will be keeping it brief. And I even have my Oscar music queued up to play if people are long-winded. So
why'd you make it little?
what's that? No.
Well, I mean, it was full screen before.
All right. So with that, we are going to start with the Gandhian Nonviolence Award. This award is given to a member who best exemplifies the qualities of compassion and selfless service, according to Gandhi's philosophy that the highest form of service is rooted in love and nonviolence, and that the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in service to others. Ideal candidates are those members who give themselves unselfishly in service to others in their personal lives and in their communities. And so up next to present the Gandhian Nonviolence Award to our own Mike Hasty, we're going to hear from Becky Looning. Go ahead, Becky.
Why am I so white?
Thank you, Josh. I am so excited to be here to present this year's Gandhian Nonviolence Award to a longtime member of Veterans for Peace Chapter 72 in Portland, Oregon. Mike Hasty. Mike Hasty, Army medic, Vietnam. Some of you may recognize Mike from past gatherings, or you may recognize his iconic photo of the Y helicopter, a calling card and question he has carried with him ever since the war. Equal parts artist and activist, Mike Hasty has a way of combining imagery and words to convey great truths about war and to speak out for peace. Mike's friend Betty Lee, a fellow photographer and peace activist in Portland, described how for the past 30 years she could always count on seeing Mike in the streets with his cameras, often more than one, protesting against the cruel wars and endless suffering caused by the US empire, and how he has often spoken passionately about the horrors of war and the devastated lives of his comrades, veterans who committed suicide or died of cancer, alcoholism, or drug addiction, as well as speaking out about the suffering of the Vietnamese people. Mike's selfless service, he really fits the description of the type of person Oren talked about earlier, caring, sharing, where it's relationships that are central in his life. It started probably before he was in the service, but certainly while he was a medic and long after the war up until today. He has worked as a registered nurse for some years in the past, and outside of work, he has always been there for family, friends, fellow veterans, even strangers, giving generously of his time as well as his money. He has traveled many miles to provide assistance to those in need, whether they needed help with a project, a shoulder to cry on, a ride to or from the hospital, or comfort as they lay dying. His friend Mike Horner affirms, "No one I know does more to walk the talk than Hasty. His AA sponsorships and devotion to other strugglers are legion, and he finds time to come and putter around with me on my projects." Well, and I just have to say, Horner's projects are things like Extinction Rebellion actions and weekly preparation of meals for homeless people. And during the Black Lives Matter protests in Portland, Mike Hasty, who describes himself as not an indoor cat, was out in the streets with Betty Lee, among thousands of others, getting tear gassed and chased by police and the federal thugs sent by Trump. And Betty describes how Mike persisted in spreading his message, not only to the protesters, but also to the cops and the feds, putting himself in harm's way. And you can search his name on YouTube and you'll turn up some interesting videos of him speaking and being tear gassed. And he's like a nonstop activist. Mike has returned to Vietnam several times on missions of restitution. He raised thousands of dollars to protect and preserve the My Lai Memorial in Vietnam so that younger generations will never forget the tragic massacre of over 500 defenseless Vietnamese villagers. And he made a special trip there in 2018 to join others in commemorating the 50-year anniversary of the tragedy at the renovated memorial site. Mike has also donated money to help children afflicted by Agent Orange and other long-term consequences of that war. Betty remembered Mike's poignant remark, "I was born in America, but in my heart, I am Vietnamese." Mike has often spoken out about the evils of US militarism and wars to high school and college students, urging them not to serve in the military, along with others in Portland. And I want to give a special shout out to VFP member Jenica Sharon. Mike has given countless hours and generous amounts of his own money to providing food and supplies to the houseless on the streets of Portland. To quote Betty Lee once more, Mike has lived his life with the same spirit of humanity rooted in love, compassion, and dedicated to justice that motivated Gandhi. It is one thing to have convictions, but we need courage to act on our convictions. Mike has both. Thank you, Mike Hasty, for your caring and sharing and it's wonderful to have you as a friend. Thank you.
Outstanding. Mike, would you like to say a few words?
Can you hear me?
Yep, we hear you, Mike.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, I just want to say I'm really, really honored to receive this award. I just want to thank the committee and the people that were involved in the award. It really does mean a lot to me. I know there are a lot of people in Veterans for Peace that also deserve this award. You know, I think the one thing that really drives me more than anything else, it's a quote that I came across several years ago. I can't remember the person who wrote it, but I use it a lot and it motivates me all the time. And that quote is simply, there is no rest for the messenger until the message has been delivered. And I think that's what it's all about. Let's face it, all of us activists have an obsession to bear witness and to engage in peace until the last hour of our death, you know, and I think that's what all of us represent. I just want to say this, and one thing I would like to say though is I know that eventually that the Veterans for Peace is going to have an award, start giving an award in honor of Aaron Bushnell. The man is iconic. I cannot say enough about this man. And I'll say this last thing. I'm currently involved in a group that's sponsoring a Palestinian family in Gaza. And so we're trying to get them out. If anybody is interested in that or want to talk about it to me, they can email me at lowercase hastie, HASTIE, Mike @earthlink.net. The father of the family sent me and the group a photograph the other day, and it was so horrifying that I do not feel comfortable in telling Veterans for Peace right now at this convention what the content of the picture was. If anybody is interested in knowing that, they can contact me. So bless you all, and your relentless work for world peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. All right, and next we're going to turn to the Service and Stewardship Award. No?
Oh, well, no. Can you
Okay,
do the
that's all
Howard
right.
Zinn first?
That's
Sorry.
fine. Okay. We'll go in this order. Yeah, so next we're moving on to the Howard Zinn Lifetime Achievement Award, which is bestowed upon the person who has made significant and ongoing outstanding contributions to the cause of peace over their lifetime. This individual will also have made exceptional efforts to increase public awareness of the costs of war, whether that's via activism, teaching, writing, lecturing, the arts, etc. This award may also be given posthumously to members who have passed away since the previous convention. And unfortunately, that is the case with this particular award. So here to present the 2024 Howard Zinn Lifetime Achievement Award posthumously to Sally Alice Thompson, who we lost this past year, is Charles Powell from New Mexico.
Good evening. Thank you. Sally Alice Thompson, her parents gave her the name Alice, and later she added Sally, because she thought that better expressed her. But she always went by both names, and she hyphenated it to let people know that her name was Sally Alice. When I first came to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I started going to NAACP meetings. That's the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Sally Alice was also at those meetings. When I would go to ACLU meetings, that's the American Civil Liberties Union, Sally Alice would be there. When I would go to SWAP meetings, that's the Southwest Organizing Project, which mainly consists of Latinas and Latinos. Sally Alice would be there. At Southwest Writers, Sally Alice was there. So she belonged to a lot of organizations, supported a lot of causes. She was very talented, so she always had good ideas on how to approach solving problems. Very talented in writing. She did author 3 books. She was good at songwriting. She was a member of Raging Grannies, and they would take the tune of familiar songs and write new lyrics. And there was no one better at writing new lyrics than Sally Alice Thompson. She was known for her walking for good causes. Probably most notable was her participating in the Great Peace Walk or Great Peace March of 1986. They walked from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. The next year, she walked in the Soviet Union from St. Petersburg to Moscow. Along the way, she met people from Turkmenistan, which was a part of the Soviet Union, and became friends. And as a result, she traveled to Turkmenistan numerous times and formed serious friendships. And she was instrumental in getting Albuquerque to form a sister cities relationship with Acrobat. I'm not saying it correctly, but anyway, it's a city in Turkmenistan, and that sister cities relationship still continues. Another notable walk was her walk to get the MOP, M-O-P, that was money out of politics. And she walked from Albuquerque, New Mexico to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and did get press coverage along the way to cover the issue of getting money out of politics. We didn't succeed in getting money out of politics, but at least we got more people to understand the issue. She led by inspiration and example. She inspired me and others to do what we could for peace and for justice.
Mm-hmm.
And she led by example because she was always peaceful and friendly and welcoming. I'm so thankful and honored to have known her.
Thank you very much, Charles. And of course, presente to Sally Alice Thompson.
Presente.
All right, and our next award is the Service and Stewardship Award, which is given to an individual who has performed exemplary service in support of the well-being of veterans and their families while advancing the culture of peace in their local community, nationally or internationally. And this awardee definitely meets that criteria. So here to present the Service and Stewardship Award for our own Travis Weiner is Joe Mondello from Colorado.
I'd like to introduce a joyful warrior who fights for peace and justice every day. Travis Weiner served with the 502nd Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division from 2004 to 2009, with 2 deployments to Iraq. He left the Army as a sergeant and then attended the University of Massachusetts, graduating in 2012. Travis then worked for the Boston-based Home Base program as a veteran outreach worker and peer support specialist. In 2014, he earned his Juris Doctor degree from the University of Colorado School of Law and currently works as Deputy State Public Defender in Taos, New Mexico. I nominated Travis because after experiencing firsthand the horrors of a senseless war, he has dedicated his life to helping his fellow veterans recover from their traumas and working to prevent needless future wars. As a combat veteran, he returned home to provide care for veterans with traumatic brain injuries, PTSD, and other invisible wounds of war. He was frustrated by civilians and government officials who called them heroes, but would not listen to their experiences and feelings about the wars they fought. Over and over, he worked with veterans who felt the same way. He thought that someone should make a documentary film to give Iraq and Afghanistan veterans a chance to tell their true stories, and finally realized that that someone would have to be him. Luckily, Travis's aunt, Katie First, a veteran commercial filmmaker, was ready to help and to direct her first full feature-length documentary, the internationally acclaimed What I Want You to Know. Travis served as co-executive producer of the film along with Afghanistan veteran and former Marine Captain Tommy Furlong, who also worked with Travis at the Home Base Project in Boston. Travis is a proud member of Veterans for Peace and served as past president of the Dan Lyons chapter of Veterans for Peace in Northern Colorado. And just let me end by saying, to me, Travis embodies what a veteran for peace is and should be. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Joe. Travis, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Sure.
Great. Thanks, Joe, so much. The first thing I want to do is thank Joe and Roy and Ben and Rosalind and Sue Ellen and everybody in the Veterans for Peace chapter in Northern Colorado. I miss them. It was a great honor to work with them. They do incredible work, and the film really couldn't have kind of caught fire without them. They kind of tirelessly promoted it, did screenings, some of I think our first screening at a movie theater. So I really appreciate it, and I appreciate all the work that they do. It's really an honor to receive the award. I know there are so many people around the country in Veterans for Peace chapters doing far more than me, and you know, it's humbling to get the award. For folks that are interested in learning more about the film, we just signed a kind of an agreement with a couple of educational film companies, and we expect that the film will be available through public libraries and universities and nonprofits before too long. Joe can give you more information about that, so can I. The last thing I want to kind of end with, the kind of a message to VFP, I know Joe and Roy and some of the folks in Veterans for Peace Northern Colorado have been talking a lot about this kind of reorienting and really figuring out, what the core mission is. And to that extent, we've talked a lot, we used to talk about a lot about this in Northern Colorado. I would encourage folks kind of nationwide to do a few things, look at other veterans organizations and, examine why they're able to get the numbers that they are, to the extent that you can partner with them to advocate. State and federal governments do so. Direct the limited time, money, and effort where you get the most bang for your buck, right? Going into high schools, right? Counter JROTC programming, meeting with your congressional delegations. I know folks are doing this kind of nationwide, but I know Joe's heard me say this before, right? In a David versus Goliath fight, right? You can't really waste any time or money or energy on anything that doesn't kind of cut to the core mission. So I know that folks are doing that work. I would just encourage kind of folks to double down on that. And I really appreciate Joe and company for nominating me and for the work they do, and keep up the work that you all do every day. You're on the right side of history, and that matters. So thank you again.
All right. Thank you, Travis, for that wonderful documentary film and for your work as a public defender. All right. And then our final individual award is the Leadership in Peace Award, which is given to a person that has displayed initiative, inclusiveness, and tireless perseverance in moving the mission of VFP forward, locally, nationally, or internationally. And this individual certainly qualifies in that regard. And I will say, this is the result of a very well-written nomination, as were all of our awards that we were talking about tonight. It's really it's a testament to the way we regard one another in VFP. I mean, these were some really well-written nominations, and this one was certainly one of those. And I'd like to now turn it on over to Tina Jero, who nominated Mike Ferner for the Leadership in Peace Award.
Thank you. Mike Ferner is an American peace activist, former Toledo, Ohio City Council member, Vietnam era vet, book author, freelance journalist, member of the Program on Corporations, Law, and Democracy Collective, and former National Director for Veterans for Peace. Mike was serving as interim director last year when I joined VFP just after the convention. Besides being super helpful to me as a new member, he also did things to promote our very small grassroots pro-Palestinian team in Wyoming. And while I've been paying attention to Veterans for Peace's projects and actions as a new member, I couldn't help but notice that Mike was sleeping outside representative offices, marching and speaking at events in varying regions, walking the Peace Walk 2024, giving webinars on Move to Amend, constructing a letter to the State Department on violations of U.S. government officials, appearing on the Veterans for Peace Radio Hour and the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, and talking to enlisted people who are seeking to leave the military or supporting the ones who are protesting in different ways. And all the while, he was keeping the organization functioning as interim director. In that role, Mike was responsive to my needs as a new member. When I had a question, he answered it. When I made flyers and signs, he approved them. When I asked for event coordination advice, he gave it. He also mailed me a free copy of his book, Inside the Red Zone, A Veteran for Peace Reports from Iraq, which I read and learned a lot from. And I still laugh every time I think of the board meeting where he stated, "Now that I'm not the director, I've been told I no longer have access to the company jet." Josh Shirley adds this part, quote, "When we were in DC together last month, I did get to hear about some of Mike's organizing efforts when he was in the Navy during the war. That was pretty neat. Basically, he was a consummate troublemaker and a pain in the rear to those in power, even as a teenage sailor, no surprise, of course. And he has always been making waves, so to speak, the epitome of a GI resistor. But it underscores that he has been at this a long time and it is absolutely at the core of who he is," unquote. So Mike Ferner deserves the Leadership in Peace Award because he truly represents tireless perseverance in moving the mission of Veterans for Peace forward. Congratulations, Mike, and thank you so much for all your help to me over the last year.
Thank you, Tina. That was very well said. Mike Ferner. You do have to take yourself off mute, though, Mike. You'd think you'd know that by now.
I should know that by now. Yeah, thank you. And thank you very much, Tina. I met Tina at a new members meeting a few months ago, and that's one of the most enjoyable things I've been able to do since coming back on the staff, is to be at the once a month Zoom meetings for new members. And it was pretty clear right off the bat that she was a real firecracker. So anytime she got a hold of me and said that she's out there in the vast expanses of Wyoming, going to reservations and small towns and organizing all sorts of stuff, if she needed anything that I could give her a hand with, I was happy to do it. And if we had about another 70 or 80 Tina J. Rose in Veterans for Peace, we would be at the top of the heap of activist organizations. So she really represents the best in VFP members. It's been a pleasure to work with her and all of the folks that I've had the good fortune to work with. So I'll just leave it at that. And this is a hell of an organization. We all love it, and it's damned important, and it's so good to see people, particularly some new young people, feel the same way towards it that us old geezers do. So thank you, Tina and Josh, for your work on the committee, and thank you for this award.
All right, thank you so much, Tina, and congratulations, Mike. All right, and then finally, with the last few minutes we have, I know time is running a little behind here, we have our Chapter of the Year Award. The VFP Chapter of the Year Award uplifts the work of those chapters that best exemplify the 5 criteria set forth by the awards committee, which are media exposure, honors, chapter growth, community service, and activism. This one's a little bit different in that rather than be nominated from someone else, it's a self-nomination. So someone from that chapter, does the nomination. And in this case, Paul Cox wrote a wonderful nomination, and here to accept it, Chuck Searcy, the president of Chapter 160, actually is in the United States and is among the audience, but I am seeing that from Ellen that she's unable to promote Chuck Searcy to a panelist for some reason. I'm not sure what that is about. Tell you what, can we go maybe to is Paul Cox possibly an option?
Chuck's coming now.
Oh, Chuck
he
is
finally
coming.
got why I was doing it.
What chapter is it? It's Vietnamese chapter.
Oh, how cool.
No, was that a false start?
No, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I think that's all right. I've had to turn on my mic. I should know these things myself, but sometimes we forget. And video. All right. Except my video doesn't seem to come on. I'm clicking it, but no results.
Don't worry, we can hear you.
All right, let me just talk. Good evening, everybody. Very glad to be here to connect virtually with people who share the same values. Our principles are rooted in our commitment to true justice and peace. So it is with a lot of gratitude and humility that we, the members of Chapter 160 of Vets for Peace, the Hoa Binh chapter in Vietnam, it means peace in Vietnamese. We want to thank you for recognizing the teamwork of our members and our mission. It goes back to 2009 when we founded the chapter in Vietnam. And most of us at that time were living and working in Vietnam. We came together to try to mitigate some of the consequences of the war, the devastation, the damage to the people and the land of Vietnam during that senseless and tragic US war in Vietnam. Since our founding back in 2009, our 86 chapter members and many more donors and supporters have worked year by year to redress the legacies of the war, to help to clean up the lethal debris of bombs and mines that have killed or injured more than 100,000 innocent Vietnamese since the war ended in 1975. We have worked to make whole through medical interventions and rehabilitation outreach some of the millions of Vietnamese who have suffered war injuries and lifetime disabilities. We've helped hundreds of blind war victims return to active lives and contribute to their families, their communities. We have linked resources and support mechanisms to benefit families who are still suffering from the heartrending and lifetime impacts of Agent Orange. One of the legacies of the war is poverty and lack of opportunity for poor and isolated families in rural mountainous areas, where Chapter 160 has provided more than 3,000 bicycles to children who otherwise would have to walk several kilometers to school every day. None of these efforts would have been possible without you, everyone on this network tonight, and the generous donations you've given, which you've contributed so freely through Chapter 160's fundraising efforts over the past 15 years. As long as our members are healthy and able, we pledge to continue to do our best to work on your behalf and other Americans of goodwill as members of Veterans for Peace, to continue in the spirit of forgiveness, about which we have learned so much from our Vietnamese friends, and to do this in a spirit of humility. We are the lucky ones. We all know that. We're able to go on with this work to help our Vietnamese friends who are not so fortunate, to help our fellow American veterans who find compassion and healing when they come to Vietnam, who contribute to building bridges of reconciliation, part of our shared commitment to make the world a better place for future generations. On behalf of our chapter, I want to thank all of you for all that you do. As members of Chapter 160, we are honored to be here tonight. We do accept this recognition with thanks and humility, and we pledge to continue to work together as long as we can to overcome the legacies of war and to build a lasting peace. Thank you all.
All right, thank you, Chuck. Congratulations to Chapter 160. Congratulations to all of our awardees, and thank you to our presenters. I also want to say on behalf of the board, thank you to all of you, to all of our amazing members who have done such extraordinary peace work consistently with this storied organization. All right, so a little bit later will be the music portion of the convention, and if it's half as wonderful as the poetry event last night, then we are in for a real treat. But first, I want to turn it over to our cash cadre. We'll hear from our own board member, Matt Southworth, the one and only Zul Zulkowitz, as well as Mike Ferner, if he isn't off partying to celebrate his new award yet. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you all, cash cadre. Thank you.
Well, we have a couple of special guests with us too, who you're going to recognize, but you've heard some from amazing young and old mentors tonight, incredibly brilliant, courageous people. There's a couple of them with us right now. I'm going to throw it right to you, Matt, to share some of your experience and relate it to what we've heard tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Zul, and thanks to everyone. Thanks to our presenters tonight. Really just an incredible and moving set of presenters, and incredibly hard to follow. And congrats to our award winners too. I just want to just kind of start by saying very briefly, you know, I'm an Iraq War vet. One of my jobs in Iraq was high value target acquisition. To do that, we used human intelligence, which meant we rounded up people in the middle of the night, put sandbags over their head, and dragged them out to a forward operating base where they were interrogated for sometimes days on end. My experience in Iraq, looking into the eyes of the people who were terrified by my presence, I recognized what I was doing when it was happening. Years later, when I started to learn about the Israel-Palestine conflict and went to Israel in 2007 and then again in 2009, I saw the same look in the eyes of the people being oppressed by the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, though I never went to Gaza, just the West Bank. So to tie that to kind of what we've been talking about today, the inextricable link between war and climate change. We know that war exacerbates climate change. We know that we cannot afford to continue to wage war and have a livable, habitable planet. Ultimately, the planet will be fine. It is us who will perish, which I think is sometimes lost when we talk about protecting the earth and climate change. We don't have very many levers of effectively organizing against these kind of corporate oligarchs who buy our democracy. But two that were talked about today a little bit were labor and consumption, withholding our dollars, withholding our labor. Those are the levers of power we need to pull to organize ourselves. So now I want to just bring it back to the discussion at hand and who we have tonight. And I'll kick it back to you, Zool, to introduce our special
thank
guest.
you, Matt. You know, we've yet to meet in person, but you've become a very close friend. Matt and I have been working on the fundraising and the development committee. He's a true expert in that. You know, this organization can grow by leaps and bounds. And what Mike Ferner at the head for the last year or so, we've done amazingly well. Last year, Ralph Nader gave us a $10,000 matching fund. He saw how much work everybody here. So hello, everyone on this call. We're now down under 100, but we need you to hold on to your hats just for a few more minutes and then to dig into your pockets. Ralph gave us 30 grand as a matching fund this year, seeing all the work that went on in the last year, thanks to so many, all of you here. So want to hear from Colonel Ann and from Medea. But Mike, jump on for a moment. You always say something that's so important about, you know, there are fires everywhere and we're always distracted by running to the latest one. And clearly that's Gaza. But, you know, was pointed out so well today in our panel, Yemen. We mustn't ever forget Yemen. There are a number of us in New York who've been standing every Saturday for 7 years now for Yemen. And so we have to fight on every front, everywhere, all the time. We all hate money and politics, but we know how important it is. So please, Mike is going to post our donation a link in the chat. And please, you've been flooding the chat all night long with your comments. Now, please flood it with your money. Medea,
With your pledges.
are you in the air, love?
No, just landed in Chicago and excited about going to the DNC and excited to have a couple of moments to spend with you to support this fundraising drive right now, because I see that when I walk through the halls of Congress every day, how many members of Congress use their time in the military to be promoting bigger military budgets, to be promoting wars with China, with Ukraine, be supporting Israel. And I also see the opposite when we have people like Ann Wright or Josie Gilbo, who's gone with us, or other members of Veterans for Peace, or when we take the office, how they perk up and start listening to us because we're talking in a language that they understand. And that's why I think it is so important to have the voices of veterans who will use their experience to try to stop wars and end wars and avoid wars instead of the ones we have for the most part in Congress right now. I think it's so sad when you look at the vice presidential pick in the Democratic Party and all the attacks on him. Did he really carry his weapon in combat in Iraq, or did he just exaggerate that? You know, that is not the issue. The issue is, why were we in Iraq? We shouldn't have been there. And we don't want to uplift the voices of those saying, you know, if you fought, if you, I think it's been an amazing job. It's been, and I'm delighted to be a supporter of Veterans for Peace. I'll kick in my support tonight, and I hope all of the others on the call will give as much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Medea. I'm going to start asking people to stop putting their pledges right in the chat right now. Colonel, we're going to go to you momentarily, but we really, folks, you know, you were flooding this chat, you know, all evening with these amazing young people, these amazing RN Lions, all these folks. Start putting your pledges in the facts. I see 500 for Paul Cox. I expect somebody to double that now. Colonel, you served in the military and then you went into diplomacy. You thought that would help, you know, end wars. You know, we were able to see Julian Assange go free this year. And he famously said, if wars can be started with lies, peace can be started with truth. Anne.
Well, that's for sure. And we certainly do need to be working to stop these wars and stop the militarization of our country. And Vets for Peace has so many great projects, so many wonderful people that we just need a little more money to keep moving some of these projects around. And I know that as you know, many folks in our community of veterans don't have a lot of money, but every little penny helps, and it makes your conscience feel better when you know you've coughed up a little bit of money. And when we think of all the big projects that we have, I mean, Chuck Searcy was just here accepting the award for the VFP chapter in Vietnam, and many of us have gone to Vietnam to, you know, to try to cleanse our conscience a little bit from what the U.S. military did in Vietnam. And as Matt said, same in Iraq and for others in Afghanistan. So, you know, all of these opportunities that Vets for Peace gives to us to travel to places that sometimes we've gone in military uniform, or other times we've gone now as civilians. And you know, to go to Gaza. Medea and others of us were in Gaza in 2009, and now thank you to Vets for Peace for having this whole convention center around yet one more war the U.S. is involved in, with its money, with its weapons, and the genocide that's going on, that we as Veterans for Peace can stand up and have been with all of the projects that we've been doing. So please give what you can. I know you'll be as generous as you can, and every little penny helps. So thank you so much.
You know, the whole peace movement is run on a shoestring, you know, spit and polish. And so we need folks right now, go look in the chat, see the highest pledge that's been made. Please, someone match that highest pledge. And then whatever the lowest ones, if you've already given, give again. Mike, Commandante, you want to say a word or two, and then we're going to throw it back to Matt.
I want to thank Medea and Anne. Anne, somebody told me you're in Malta. Where are you?
I just got back from the Gaza flotilla in Malta. I'm in New York City right now.
Oh, okay. All right. I thought you were speaking to us at 4 a.m. somewhere.
No, thank God.
No time like the present.
Thank you both for coming on. And there are so many things that we can be doing in Veterans for Peace with the adequate resources that it's going to take to get the job done. Our folks out in the chapters and the independent members are the backbone of the activities. But in order to help coordinate things and do the sorts of stuff that a national organization needs to do, and do it better than we've ever done, we really need your assistance. And we really want to be sure to let Ralph know that we've been able to meet his match. Last year, you know, Zul mentioned Ralph made a $10,000 pledge, and we tripled that. So we brought in $30,000. So this year, Ralph gave us 30 and said that we had to match that. So we're on the way to doing it, and thank all of you very much. And as Ann said, any amount is wonderful and is going to go towards that. Ralph's match. Thank you.
And we only got a few more minutes to do it. So, Matt, just explain how important the money is to what this organization can do. You know, we'll never replace Mike, but we really badly need an executive director with really top talent and admin skills that makes such a difference in an organization. Go ahead, Matt.
Absolutely. You know, so one of the things Mike and you and I have talked about frequently over the last year or so is the need for more staff, the need for staff to do membership work. That's what this money goes toward. You know, when Mike brought Casey back to do the contract work she's doing for membership, you know, brought Chris Smiley on to do the incredible work he's doing to help us put ourselves out there on Instagram and social media. All that is driven directly from the donations you all are making now. And Ralph's match, which is an incredibly generous match from Ralph, is really just helping us magnify and grow what we can do as an organization in the coming year. And this is what we're facing. We know what we're facing. We've got a genocide happening in Gaza. We have an expanding war between Russia and Ukraine. Who knows where that leads? Of course, the U.S. has been posturing in the South China Sea for the last decade or two, and that's coming to a little bit of a head. I mean, there are so many things that we need to work against right now. And the empire is teetering. It's teetering on the brink. So we now have an opportunity as Veterans for Peace to put our experience and our associate members too, to put their knowledge and their experience to work, calling for an end to these policies. And we do that in so many ways. Sometimes we do it out in the streets and we give people the inspiration to act. We've heard that time and time again tonight. People inspired to act because they saw you in the streets. They saw you with the Veterans for Peace flag marching in the Memorial Day parade. That stuff matters. It also matters to be in the halls of Congress, like Medea is saying. That is what it takes to affect policy and change. And again, we have our members.
Matt,
go ahead,
Matt,
Zool.
one of the ways that we know that empire is teetering, we just saw the millions and millions and millions that AIPAC put into these little elections. It's the money. It's the money. So let us raise the money. All right. 4 Arrows just gave us $1,000. Is there somebody here still online that can give $1,000? And I'm seeing chapter after chapter that's giving 500. Can we see whatever chapter is being represented here tonight that's not given something now? See if you can give us 500 right now. We got to see the chat filled with these pledges, just like we saw comment after comment tonight. We got to see pledge after pledge now.
Yes. Thank you to Medea. Thank you to Art, both for making $1,000 pledges. It's incredible. The $50 and $100 pledges are great too. Please keep them coming. They count so much for us. Those gifts really add up. The vast majority of people in our donor base are giving those small gifts, and that's making the difference. So whatever you can give, whatever's comfortable. Yes, Zool, let's match those $1,000 gifts. You get the lifetime membership, of course, you know, with a gift of $1,000. I know many of you on this call have many lifetime memberships, and we thank you for that. We thank you for that.
I want to thank Thomas Leonard, who's been the board leader in the cash cadre. And we're going to ask a lot of you who are still on the call to join us in the cash cadre in the next couple of weeks. And then we're going to gear up for a big Armistice Day push. We want to build the membership. We know that takes money. You know, we went from a couple of hundred hits on Facebook a year or two ago to tens of thousands. I think maybe 1 million on one that Chris Smiley did a while back. So, I mean, we've grown this organization. Thanks so much, Commandante Mike Ferner, a won award tonight, and Medea and Colonel. We want to give you guys the last word before Susan cuts us off. We got a dance party I know everybody wants to get to. Mike, you want to raise a couple of bucks before we give it to Medea and Ann?
I want to thank Medea for her contribution. I don't want to put her on the spot, but she gave a significant gift last year, as she does most years. And just wanted to acknowledge that here, Medea. And unfortunately, that won't go towards Ralph's $30,000. So you can always throw something else in. But thank you so much for your generosity in the past, Medea.
Colonel.
Yeah, well, thanks to everybody for what you're giving, and you know, it goes for a good cause. We're going to probably do another peace march. Hey, how about that, Tarek and Ellen? Let's do something. We have so many great projects that Vets for Peace has, the Golden Rule, all of the chapter projects that are going on, and all the money that comes into Vets for Peace goes for very, very good causes and good issues, as you all know, because you're the ones that implement them. So cough it up. Thanks.
Gaza Flotilla, the No to NATO conference. There's so many things this mighty little group has been so involved in, and it all takes money, and we need you to keep it going. Ellen or Susan, maybe you can answer this question as we go into the music. Will people still keep going and making their donations through the chat?
No, we're gonna have to shut this meeting down because I have to go run the music meeting. But people can just go to the website. Maybe Mike, can you throw that in the chat one last time? People can go to the website, and if you make a monthly pledge, the whole year's worth will go toward the match. So you can do that. And I am gonna have to shut this down as soon as very fast. Mike, just put that in the chat for me quick, and then
yeah, let's get that in there. And thank you, Medea. Thanks for coming. She's off to the DNC. Thank you, Colonel. Thank you, Super Ellen Davidson and Mighty Mike Ferner and Mighty Matt. Keep the dollars coming, folks. Thank you all.
Love you all. See you at the music concert. Come to that next.